Hey guys, tonight we begin in the shadow of St. Agnes Priory, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and the faint tang of the Thames. Sister Eleanor, prioress of the crumbling convent, stood in the shadow of the chapter house, her black habit blending into the dusk. The bell for vespers had just rung, its mournful toll echoing across the barren courtyard, but Eleanor lingered, her ears pricked for the voices drifting from the bishop's entourage. They had arrived that morning, their horses' hoofs clattering on the cobbles, their crimson cloaks a stark contrast to the priory's muted greys. Bishop Walter of London was here to inspect, to probe, to judge. And now, as the day waned, his clerks whispered secrets that made Eleanor's blood run cold. "She's the one," hissed a reedy voice, barely audible over the wind. "The nun who runs the brothel in Southwark. The unicorn, they call it. A den of sin, fattening the priory's coffers." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her fingers clutching the rosary at her waist. The accusation was not new. Rumors had slithered through London's taverns for years, but to hear it spoken so boldly, within the sacred precincts of her priory, was a wound deeper than any blade. She was Prioress Eleanor, daughter of a noble house, vowed to chastity and obedience, yet branded a bawd by men who knew nothing of her struggles. The second voice, gruffer, replied, "Proof, man. The bishop wants proof. If St. Agnes is profiting from whores, we'll have the king's men here by Michaelmas." Eleanor's mind raced. Proof? There was none, or so she prayed. The priory owned properties in Southwark, yes, inherited from a long-dead patron, but she had never set foot in the unicorn. Had she? Her memory faltered, clouded by years of ledgers and compromises. The priory was starving, its fields fallow, its alms dwindled by the king's endless wars. Had she turned a blind eye to the source of certain rents? She shook her head, banishing the thought. She was no sinner, not in that way. But doubt gnawed at her, as it always did when the world turned its gaze upon the women of St. Agnes. She slipped back into the chapter house, her footsteps silent on the worn tiles. The nuns were gathered, their faces pale in the flickering candlelight. Sister Agnes, ever devout, clutched her psalter, her lips moving in silent prayer. Sister Beatrice, sharp-tongued and restless, slouched against a pillar, her eyes darting to the door as if plotting escape. Novice Marjorie, barely 16, sat at Eleanor's side, her wide eyes fixed on her prioress with a trust that felt like a burden. They were her sisters, her charges, her responsibility. And now, perhaps, her shame. "Prioress," whispered Marjorie, her voice trembling, "is it true what they say about Southwark?" Eleanor's heart sank. Even the novices had heard the rumors. She forced a smile, her voice steady despite the storm within. "Gossip is the devil's tongue, Marjorie. Pay it no mind. We serve God here, not the slanders of men." But as she spoke, her mind drifted to a day 20 years past, when she was Marjorie's age, a girl of 12 thrust into the priory's gates by a father who could not afford another dowry. The world had been simpler then, or so it seemed. She had taken her vows at 16, not out of piety but necessity, for what else could a third daughter do? Marriage was for her sisters, wealth for her brothers. The convent was her prison, her refuge, her purpose. She had risen to prioress by wit and will, managing the priory's meagre resources with a merchant's cunning. But had that cunning led her astray? The door creaked open, and Father Thomas entered, his gaunt face shadowed by his cowl. He was their priest, their confessor, a man who had served St. Agnes for a decade yet remained an enigma. His eyes met Eleanor's, and she saw a flicker of unease. Did he know something? Had he heard the bishop's clerks? She gestured for him to sit, her voice low. "Father, what news from the bishop?" He hesitated, his fingers twisting the cord of his robe. He questions the priory's income, prioress. He spoke of Southwark, of properties that bring in coin but stain the soul. Eleanor's stomach churned. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing," he said quickly, too quickly. "I swore our accounts are clean. But he demands to see the ledgers tomorrow." "The ledgers!" Eleanor's mind flashed to the leather-bound book in her cell, its pages filled with neat rows of figures, and a few entries she could not explain. Rents from Southwark, marked only as miscellaneous income. She had never questioned them closely, trusting the steward who managed the properties. But now, with the bishop's eye upon her, every line seemed a noose. "Prepare the sisters for Compline," she said, dismissing Thomas with a nod. As the nuns filed out, she lingered, her gaze falling on the cracked statue of Saint Agnes, the virgin martyr whose name their priory bore. Agnes, who had died rather than surrender her chastity. What would she think of Eleanor, a prioress accused of profiting from sin? That night, as the priory slept, Eleanor sat at her desk, the ledger open before her. The candle's flame danced, casting shadows on the vellum. There it was, Southwark, Unicorn House, 10 marks yearly. The words stared back at her, accusing. She had never visited the Unicorn, never seen its tenants. But she knew Southwark's reputation, its stews, its taverns, its women who sold their bodies for survival. Had she, in her desperation to keep the priory afloat, become complicit in their trade? She closed the ledger, her hands trembling. Tomorrow she would face the bishop. Tomorrow she would learn the truth, or bury it deeper. For now she prayed, not for forgiveness, but for strength. The strength to protect her sisters, to preserve Saint Agnes, to outwit the men who would see them fall. The wind howled outside, and in its wail Eleanor heard the whispers of Southwark, calling her to confront the sins she had never dared to name. The weight of vows. The morning after Bishop Walter's clerks sowed their venomous whispers, the priory of St. Agnes awoke to a grey dawn, heavy with mist from the Thames. Sister Eleanor stood at the window of her cell, her breath fogging the warped glass as she gazed at the barren fields beyond the priory walls. The harvest had been meagre again, the tithes from their dwindling tenants barely enough to keep the sisters fed. The ledger, still open on her desk from last night's vigil, mocked her with its stark figures. 10 marks from the Unicorn House in Southwark, a sum that could buy grain for a month, repair the leaking roof, or bribe a bishop's clerk to look the other way. But at what cost? She closed her eyes, her fingers tracing the wooden cross at her neck. "Lord, give me clarity," she prayed, though her heart doubted the prayer would be answered. Clarity had been scarce since she became prioress 5 years ago, inheriting a priory on the brink of ruin. The stricter claustration rules imposed by the Church had choked their income. Nuns could no longer weave cloth for sale, teach girls of noble birth, or tend to pilgrims as they once had. The world outside demanded their seclusion, yet scorned them when they faltered. And now the Unicorn House loomed like a spectre, threatening to unravel everything she had fought to preserve. A knock at the door startled her. "Prioress?" came Sister Agnes's timid voice. "Master Godwin is here. He wishes to speak of the Southwark rents." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Godwin, the priory's steward, was a necessary evil, a merchant with a nose for coin and a tongue that dripped flattery. He managed the priory's properties across the river, sparing Eleanor the need to venture into Southwark's mire. But his visits always left her uneasy, as if he knew more than he let on. She smoothed her habit, tucked the ledger beneath a stack of psalters, and opened the door. "Send him to the parlour," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. The parlour was a sparse room, its only adornment a faded tapestry of Saint Agnes cradling her lamb. Godwin stood by the hearth, his fur-trimmed cloak out of place amid the priory's austerity. His face, ruddy from the morning's chill, split into a grin as Eleanor entered. "Good prioress," he said, bowing with exaggerated courtesy. "You look as radiant as ever, a beacon of God's grace." "Spare me your honeyed words, Master Godwin," Eleanor said, gesturing for him to sit. "What brings you so early? The rents are not due for a fortnight." His grin faltered, but only for a moment. "Aye, but there's talk in London, prioress. Talk that could trouble St. Agnes. I thought it best to warn you." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "What talk?" Godwin leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The bishop's men are sniffing about Southwark, asking questions about certain establishments. The Unicorn, in particular. They say the priory profits from it, and not in a godly way." She forced her face to remain impassive, though her mind raced. "The priory owns properties in Southwark, as you well know. We lease them to tenants, as is our right. If the tenants misuse our land, that is their sin, not ours." Godwin's eyes narrowed, appraising her. "A fine defence, prioress, but bishops care little for truth when scandal's in the air. The Unicorn's been a steady earner, 10 marks a year, no questions asked. But if the king's men come calling, they'll want more than words. They'll want the priory's deeds." The ledger's entry flashed in Eleanor's mind. Southwark, Unicorn House, 10 marks yearly. She had never questioned it, not deeply. Godwin had assured her the properties were leased to respectable tenants, tavern-keepers, merchants, widows. Had he lied, or had she too willing to believe him? "Tell me plainly, Godwin," she said, her voice low and sharp. "What is the Unicorn House? A brothel, as they say?" He shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming on the table. "It's a house, prioress. Folk live there and rent it. Aye, some may call it a stew-house, but that's Southwark for you. The Bishop of Winchester owns half the stews there, and no one bats an eye. The rent comes to us clean, and it's kept your sisters fed." Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap, hidden beneath the table. The Bishop of Winchester's stews were notorious, their profits lining the church's coffers while the women within them withered. She had heard tales of such places, houses where women sold their bodies, some by choice, others by desperation. Had St. Agnes been drawn into that same web? "And the tenants?" she pressed. "Who holds the lease?" "A man named Friar Mutt," Godwin said, his tone careful. "A landlord of sorts. He manages the house, pays us prompt. I've never dealt with the particulars." "Friar Mutt," she repeated, committing the name to memory. "And these women, if they are women, are they protected? Cared for?" Godwin shrugged, a gesture that made her blood simmer. "They're alive, ain't they? Better than starving in the streets. Some even say the priory does them a kindness, giving them a roof." A kindness! The word tasted bitter. Eleanor thought of the novices in her care. Marjorie, with her eager heart, Agnes, with her fragile faith, Beatrice, with her restless spirit. Had their survival come at the cost of others' suffering? She rose, her voice cold. I want a full accounting of all Southwark rents, Godwin. Every property, every tenant. Bring it to me by tomorrow." He stood, bowing again, though his eyes gleamed with something she couldn't place, amusement, perhaps, or calculation. "As you wish, prioress. But take heed, Southwark's a murky place, and some truths are best left in the mud." After he left, Eleanor sank back into her chair, her head in her hands. The parlor felt smaller now, the tapestry of St. Agnes a silent rebuke. She had taken vows of poverty, chastity, of obedience, but the weight of those vows had never felt so crushing. Obedience to God was one thing. Obedience to a world that starved her sisters was another. The priory needed coin for bread, for candles, for the masons who would mend the crumbling walls. Without it, St. Agnes would be dissolved, its lands seized, its nuns cast out. Was it a sin to accept rent from a house of sin if it preserved their sacred work? Her thoughts were interrupted by the clatter of the gate bell. Sister Beatrice appeared at the doorway, her habit askew, her cheeks flushed as if she'd been running. "Prioress," she said, her voice urgent, "Father Thomas needs you. It's the bishop. He's summoned you to the chapter house. Now." Eleanor's heart lurched. The bishop, already? She had hoped for time to prepare, to scour the ledgers, to confront Godwin's half-truths. But time, like coin, was a luxury she could not afford. She rose, smoothing her habit, and followed Beatrice through the cloisters. The mist had thickened, cloaking the priory in a shroud that matched the fog in her soul. The chapter house was lit by a single chandelier, its candles guttering in the draught. Bishop Walter sat at the head of the table, his crimson robes pooling like blood on the stone floor. His clerks flanked him, their quills poised over parchment, ready to trap her words. Father Thomas stood to one side, his face pale, his eyes avoiding hers. The air was thick with expectation, and Eleanor felt the weight of every gaze upon her. "Prioress Eleanor," the bishop began, his voice smooth but edged with steel, "we have heard troubling reports about St. Agnes. Reports that suggest your stewardship has strayed from the path of righteousness. Will you answer for your priory's dealings in Southwark?" Eleanor clasped her hands before her, her rosary digging into her palms. She thought of the ledger, of Godwin's evasions, of the sisters who depended on her. She thought of the Unicorn House, a name that now burned in her mind like a brand. "My Lord Bishop," she said, her voice clear despite the storm within, "St. Agnes serves God and the poor. Our dealings are honest, our hearts pure. If there are questions, I will answer them fully." The bishop's eyes narrowed, and she knew he scented weakness. "Then let us begin with your accounts," he said, gesturing to a clerk. "Bring me the priory's ledgers. All of them." Eleanor's breath caught, but she kept her face serene. The ledgers would betray her, or save her. She had until tomorrow to find the truth about the Unicorn House, to decide whether to confess or conceal. As the bishop's clerks began their scrutiny, she prayed, not for salvation, but for time. Time to unravel the sins that bound St. Agnes, and to shield her sisters from the ruin that loomed. The unicorn's shadow. The Thames was a grey serpent under the morning mist, its sluggish waters lapping at the wharf where Sister Eleanor stood, her cloak drawn tight against the chill. The boatman, a wiry man with a scar bisecting his brow, eyed her warily as she stepped into his skiff. "Southwark's no place for a nun," he muttered, gripping his oar. "You sure, my lady?" "I am no lady," Eleanor replied, her voice firm despite the knot in her stomach. "I am prioress of St. Agnes, and my business is my own. Row on." The boatman shrugged and pushed off, the skiff gliding through the mist toward the south bank. Eleanor had left the priory before dawn, entrusting Sister Agnes with the morning prayers and telling no one, not even Father Thomas, where she was bound. The bishop's demand for the ledgers loomed over her like a storm cloud, and Godwin's evasions about the Unicorn House had left her no choice. She needed to see the truth for herself, to stand on the soil that might damn or save her priory. Southwark emerged from the fog like a fever dream, its ramshackle taverns and stew-houses crowding the river-bank. The air reeked of ale, smoke, and something fouler, decay, perhaps, or despair. Eleanor's heart pounded as she stepped ashore, her boots sinking into the muddy lane. She had heard tales of Southwark stews, where women plied their trade under the shadow of the church's own properties. The Bishop of Winchester, it was said, grew fat on such rents, his coffers filled by the very sins he preached against. Could St. Agnes have fallen into the same trap? She navigated the narrow streets, her habit drawing stares from peddlers and drunks. A woman with a painted face leaned from a doorway, calling out, "Lost your way, sister? We've no salvation here." Eleanor ignored her, clutching the scrap of parchment Godwin had given her. Unicorn House by the Rose Tavern. The directions were vague, but the Rose was infamous, a den of gamblers and whores. She found it soon enough, its sign creaking in the wind, a faded rose painted above the door. Beside it stood a squat, timber-framed building, its shutters closed tight despite the hour. No sign marked it as the Unicorn House, but the ledger's entry burned in Eleanor's memory, 10 marks yearly. She knocked, her knuckles rapping sharply on the weathered door. Silence answered, then a shuffle of footsteps. The door cracked open, revealing a woman with weary eyes and graying hair, her coarse apron stained with grease. "What's a nun want here?" she asked, her voice thick with suspicion. "I am Prioress Eleanor of St. Agnes," Eleanor said, holding the woman's gaze. "This house belongs to my priory. I would speak with its tenants." The woman's eyes widened, then narrowed. "You'd best come in, then. But don't expect a warm welcome." Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of cheap tallow and unwashed bodies. The room was dim, lit only by a single candle on a scarred table. 2 other women sat there, one young with a bruise blooming on her cheek, the other older, her fingers twisting a frayed shawl. A man lounged in the corner, his boots propped on a stool, a dagger glinting at his belt. Eleanor's pulse quickened, but she kept her posture rigid, her hands folded beneath her cloak. "I'm Els," the gray-haired woman said, closing the door. "This is my house, or yours, I suppose, if you're the priory's lady. These are my girls, Joan and Kate. And that's Friar Mutt." She jerked her head toward the man, who offered a mocking bow without rising. "Master Friar Mutt," Eleanor said, her voice cool. "You lease this house from St. Agnes, I understand." "Aye, and pay good coin for it," Friar Mutt replied, his voice oily. 10 marks a year, straight to your steward. Keeps your candles lit, don't it?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. "And what trade is plied here? Speak plainly." Els laughed, a harsh sound that held no mirth. "Plainly? This is a stew-house, prioress. My girls work the trade, same as half the houses on this street. Your priory takes its cut, and we all sleep sounder for it." The words struck Eleanor like a blow. She had feared as much, but to hear it confirmed. Here, in this dim room, with these women's eyes upon her, was a weight she could scarcely bear. "You mean to say this is a brothel," she said, her voice low, "and St. Agnes profits from it." "Call it what you will," Els said, shrugging. "We pay our rent, and your priory don't ask questions. Been that way since before my time." Joan, the younger woman, spoke up, her voice trembling. "It ain't so bad, sister. Els looks after us. Better than the streets, or the Winchester stews. I'd be dead if not for this place." Eleanor's gaze softened as she looked at Joan, whose bruised cheek told a story words could not. "How did you come here?" she asked. Els answered for her. Joan was a serving girl, tossed out when her master got her with child. The babe didn't live, and neither would she, out there. She gestured toward the street. "I took her in, same as I was taken in years ago. By a nun, no less." Eleanor's breath caught. "A nun?" "I from St. Agnes," Els said, her eyes searching Eleanor's face. "Sister Mary," she was called. Long gone now, God rest her. She ran a house for women like us, a lay sister's place, but when it burned down, this was all we had left. The priory kept the rent coming, and we kept the beds warm. A lay sister's house. Eleanor had heard of such places, charitable refuges for women fallen on hard times, often run by convents. Had the Unicorn House begun as such, only to slide into something darker? She thought of the ledger, its cryptic entries, and the prioresses before her who had turned a blind eye. Had Sister Mary known what her charity would become? Friar Mutt stirred, his dagger catching the candlelight. "Enough chatter," he said. "You've seen the place, prioress. The rent's paid, and your priory's none the worse for it, unless you mean to shut us down, and starve your nuns in the bargain." Eleanor's hands clenched beneath her cloak. Shut them down? The thought was tempting, a cleansing fire to burn away the sin. But the priory's survival hung by a thread. 10 marks could mean the difference between bread and hunger, warmth and cold. And what of these women? Joan's bruised face, Elsa's weary resilience. Could she cast them out to worse fates? "I will consider what I've seen," she said at last, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "But know this, Saint Agnes serves God, not mammon. If this house is a sin, it will be answered for." Friar Mutt smirked, but Elsa's eyes held a flicker of respect. "You're not like the others," she said. "Most nuns don't cross the river. But take care, prioress. Southwark's got claws, and they don't let go easy." Eleanor left the Unicorn House with the weight of its truth pressing on her shoulders. The mist had lifted, but the world felt no clearer. As she boarded the skiff back to the priory, she thought of Sister Mary, the nun who had tried to save women like Els and Joan. Had she, too, faced this choice, between purity and survival? The ledger awaited her, as did the bishop's scrutiny. She would need to confront Godwin, to demand the full truth about the priory's dealings. But more than that, she needed to confront herself. Was she a shepherd, guarding her flock, or a merchant, trading in souls? The bishop's scrutiny. The chapter house of St. Agnes Priory was a cold vault of stone, its air thick with the scent of wax and fear. Sister Eleanor stood at the head of the gathered nuns, her hands clasped tightly before her, the rosary beads digging into her palms. The sisters sat in rows along the benches, their habits a sombre sea of black, their faces pale under the weight of Bishop Walter's presence. He loomed at the far end of the room, his crimson robe stark against the grey walls, flanked by 2 clerks whose quills scratched ceaselessly on parchment. Father Thomas stood to one side, his head bowed, his fingers twisting the cord of his robe as if it were a lifeline. The bishop's visitation, meant to ensure the priory's spiritual health, felt instead like a trial, and Eleanor was its chief defendant. "My daughters in Christ," Bishop Walter began, his voice resonant with authority, "I come to St. Agnes not as an accuser, but as a shepherd seeking to guide his flock. Yet I hear whispers, troubling whispers, that this house, vowed to purity, has been tainted by commerce with sin. Speak, Prioress Eleanor, and account for your stewardship." Eleanor's throat tightened, but she met his gaze, her voice steady. "My Lord Bishop, St. Agnes is a humble house, dedicated to God's service. Our income, meager as it is, comes from lands and rents granted by pious patrons. If there are accusations, I beg you name them plainly, that I may answer with truth." The bishop's lips curled, a smile that held no warmth. "Plainly, then. It is said that St. Agnes profits from a stew-house in Southwark, the Unicorn House, a place of harlotry. 10 marks a year, I'm told, flow from that den into your coffers. What say you to this?" A murmur rippled through the nuns. Sister Agnes gasped, her psalter slipping from her hands to the floor. Novice Marjorie's eyes widened, darting to Eleanor with a mix of fear and trust. Sister Beatrice, seated at the back, smirked faintly, as if the accusation were a jest she alone understood. Eleanor felt the weight of their gazes, each a thread pulling at the fragile fabric of her authority. "My lord," she said, choosing her words as carefully as one might step through a mire, "the priory owns properties in Southwark, leased to tenants through our steward, Master Godwin. If any tenant misuses our land, it is without our knowledge or consent. I have begun an inquiry to ensure all rents are lawful." The bishop leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "An inquiry, you say? Convenient, prioress, that you claim ignorance only now, when my clerks are at your door. Where are your ledgers? Let us see these lawful rents." Eleanor's heart sank. The ledgers, still in her cell, held the damning entry: Southwark, Unicorn House, 10 marks yearly. She had not had time to confront Godwin fully, to untangle the truth of the Unicorn House since her visit yesterday. "The ledgers are prepared, my lord," she said, buying time. "They will be brought to you by noon." "Noon?" The bishop's voice sharpened. "I will have them now, prioress, lest you think to amend them in the interim." Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion erupted at the back of the chapter house. Sister Beatrice stood, her habit dishevelled, her face flushed with defiance. "If it's sin you seek, my lord bishop, look to your own house," she cried. "The Bishop of Winchester rakes in gold from Southwark stews, yet you hound us for scraps? Hypocrisy wears a fine robe, does it not?" The room fell silent, the air taut as a bowstring. Sister Agnes crossed herself, whispering a prayer, while Marjorie shrank back, her hands trembling. The bishop's face darkened, his fingers gripping the arms of his chair. "Silence, woman!" he thundered. "You dare speak so to your bishop? Name yourself, and explain this insolence." Beatrice stepped forward, undaunted. "I am Sister Beatrice, and I speak what others fear to say. Saint Agnes starves while you feast, my lord. If we take rent from Southwark, it's to keep bread in our mouths, not to line our purses. Judge us if you must, but judge your brothers first." Eleanor's chest tightened. Beatrice's outburst, however true, was a spark in a dry field. She moved swiftly to her side, placing a hand on her arm. "Enough, sister," she said softly, her voice laced with warning. "Return to your seat." Beatrice shook her off, her eyes blazing. "Why should I? They'll brand us whores regardless, prioress. Better to speak truth than cower." The bishop rose, his presence filling the room. "This is the discipline of Saint Agnes? Nuns who rail like tavern wenches? Prioress, you will confine this sister to her cell until she learns humility. And you will bring me those ledgers, now." Eleanor bowed her head, her mind racing. Beatrice's defiance had turned a scrutiny into a spectacle, and the bishop's anger would not be easily appeased. "As you command, my lord," she said, gesturing to Sister Agnes. "Take Sister Beatrice to her cell and remain with her." As Agnes led a still defiant Beatrice away, Eleanor turned to Father Thomas. "Fetch the ledgers from my cell," she whispered. "The topmost, beneath the psalters." He nodded, his face pale, and slipped out. She prayed he would not falter, that he would not glimpse the unicorn's entry and betray her unwittingly. The bishop sat, his clerks resuming their scratching. "Prioress," he said, his tone colder now, "your priory teeters on the edge of scandal. If these accusations prove true, Saint Agnes may face dissolution. The King's Court takes a dim view of nuns entangled in such matters." Eleanor's stomach churned, but she held his gaze. "Saint Agnes is a house of God, my lord. We shelter the poor, Pray for the souls of the faithful, and strive to live as Christ commands. If there is fault in our stewardship, I will answer for it." The bishop's smile returned, sharp as a blade. "You will, prioress. You will." Father Thomas returned, the ledger clutched to his chest. He placed it before the bishop, his hands trembling slightly. Eleanor's heart pounded as the bishop opened it, his fingers tracing the neat rows of her handwriting. She had not had time to obscure the unicorn's entry, to invent a lie that might shield her. The truth lay bare, a single line among dozens, but one that could undo them all. The bishop paused, his eyes narrowing as he reached the Southwark entries. "Unicorn House," he read aloud, his voice heavy with implication. 10 marks yearly. "And what manner of house is this, prioress?" Eleanor's mouth went dry. She thought of Els, the weary woman who ran the Unicorn, and Joan, with her bruised cheek and fragile hope. She thought of the Priory's empty larder, the leaking roof, the sisters who looked to her for salvation. "A house leased to tenants, my lord," she said, her voice steady. "Its use is managed by our steward, Master Godwin. I have only yesterday begun to investigate its nature." The bishop's gaze bored into her, searching for deceit. "Investigate? A prioress who knows not her own income? I find that hard to credit." Before Eleanor could respond, Marjorie stood, her young voice trembling but clear. "Prioress Eleanor is good, my lord. She feeds us, teaches us, protects us. If there's sin in Southwark, it's not hers." The bishop's eyes flicked to Marjorie, then back to Eleanor. "A loyal child," he said dryly. "But loyalty does not erase sin. We will examine this ledger closely, prioress, and summon your steward. If there is truth to these rumors, God's justice will find you." As the bishop dismissed them, Eleanor led the nuns from the chapter house, her mind a tumult. Beatrice's outburst had inflamed the bishop's suspicions, and Marjorie's defense, though heartfelt, had only drawn more attention to her leadership. The ledger, now in the bishop's hands, was a sword hanging over her neck. She needed to find Godwin, to demand every detail of the Unicorn House, and to decide, once and for all, whether to sever ties with it, even if it meant the Priory's ruin. Outside, the mist had returned, cloaking the Priory in a shroud of uncertainty. Eleanor glanced at Marjorie, who lingered at her side, her eyes filled with questions. "Go to prayers, Marjorie," she said gently, "and pray for us all." As the novice hurried away, Eleanor turned toward the Priory gate. Godwin would be at the market today, haggling over grain. She would find him, confront him, and unearth the truth. But as she stepped into the mist, she felt the shadow of the Unicorn House clinging to her, its secrets a chain she could not yet break. The Southwark connection. The market square of Southwark buzzed with life, a chaotic tapestry of hawkers' cries, the clatter of carts, and the stench of fish and dung mingling in the damp air. Sister Eleanor navigated the throng, her black habit a stark contrast to the gaudy colors of merchants and townsfolk. Her heart thudded with purpose, her mind fixed on Master Godwin, the steward whose half-truths had entangled St. Agnes Priory in scandal. The bishop's visitation yesterday had left her exposed, the ledger now in his clerk's hands, its entry for the Unicorn House a silent accusation. She needed answers, truths, not evasions, before the bishop's scrutiny turned to judgment. She found Godwin near a grain stall, his fur-trimmed cloak flapping as he haggled with a farmer over sacks of barley. His ruddy face broke into a grin as he spotted her, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Prioress Eleanor," he called, bowing with his usual flourish. "What brings you to this den of thieves? Surely not to barter for oats." "Enough pleasantries, Master Godwin," Eleanor said, her voice low but sharp. She drew him aside, away from the stall's curious onlookers, to a shadowed corner by a tavern wall. "I've seen the Unicorn House. I've met Els and her girls. You told me the rents were clean, but that house is a brothel, and St. Agnes profits from it. Speak the truth, or I'll have you before the bishop's court." Godwin's grin faded, his hands rising as if to ward off her words. Now, prioress, let's not be hasty. The Unicorn's a house, aye, and its trade ain't the holiest, but it's no secret in Southwark. The rent's been paid for decades, long before my time or yours. Decades. Eleanor's stomach twisted. The revelation that the Priory's ties to the Unicorn predated her stewardship was both a relief and a burden. Who began this? Which prioress? Godwin shrugged, his eyes darting to the crowd as if seeking escape. I ain't one for old tales, prioress. The records go back to Prioress Matilda, some 30 years past. She took the rent, same as those after her. Kept the Priory's roof from caving in, didn't it? Prioress Matilda. Eleanor's mind raced, recalling the name from dusty charters in the Priory's archive. Matilda had led St. Agnes during a famine, when the convent's fields lay fallow and its alms dried up. Had she, in desperation, struck a devil's bargain? "And you never thought to tell me?" Eleanor pressed, her voice rising despite her effort to stay calm. "You let me sign ledgers blind to their source?" Godwin's face hardened, his tone losing its polish. "You didn't ask, prioress. You wanted coin for bread, for candles, for your sister's shivering backs. I brought it, no questions asked. Southwark's full of stews, half owned by the church itself. Why's St. Agnes different?" Eleanor's hands clenched, her rosary beads biting into her palm. "Because we are vowed to God, not to mammon. If we profit from sin, what are we but hypocrites in habits?" Godwin snorted, leaning closer, his breath sour with ale. "Hypocrites? Look to Winchester's bishop, prioress. His stews line the streets, and he dines on gold plate. At least your coin feeds the poor, not just your belly." His words stung, echoing Sister Beatrice's outburst in the chapter house. The church's complicity in Southwark's trade was no secret, yet it offered Eleanor no comfort. She thought of Joan, the bruised girl at the Unicorn, and Els, who claimed a nun had saved her. Was St. Agnes's rent a lifeline for such women, or a chain binding them to sin? "Tell me everything," she said, her voice cold. "Every tenant, every mark. And show me the deeds for the Unicorn House." Godwin hesitated, then reached into his satchel, producing a roll of parchment. "The deeds are old, prioress. Signed by Matilda, leased to a man named Friarmut's father. The son runs it now. Same terms, 10 marks a year. Here's the latest tally." He handed her a smaller sheet, its ink fresh, listing Southwark properties and their rents. Eleanor scanned the list, her eyes snagging on the Unicorn's entry. But something was amiss. "This says 12 marks," she said, her brow furrowing. "The ledger I gave the bishop lists 10. Godwin's face paled, a bead of sweat glistening on his temple despite the chill. "A clerical error, prioress. The ledger's old, my tally's new. I'll amend it. An error." Eleanor's voice was a blade. 2 marks was no trifling sum, enough to buy a month's flour or bribe a clerk. Was Godwin skimming the difference, or was the discrepancy a deeper deception? "You'll amend nothing until I see every record. Meet me at the Priory tomorrow with all accounts, or I'll summon you before the bishop myself." Godwin bowed, his grin returning, though it was strained. "As you wish, prioress. But take care, you're wading deep in Southwark's mud. It clings." She turned away, the parchment clutched in her hand, and made her way back through the market. The crowd's noise faded as her thoughts turned inward. The discrepancy in the marks suggested Godwin might be more than a careless middleman. Had he inflated the rents to pocket the surplus, or was he hiding the unicorn's true profits to shield the priory, or himself? And Prioress Matilda's role? Had she knowingly leased the house to a brothel, or had it morphed into one over time, as Elsa's tale of a lay sister's house implied? The ferry back to the priory was a blur, the Thames a cold mirror reflecting Eleanor's turmoil. She thought of the bishop, poring over the ledger in his chambers, his clerks poised to uncover the unicorn's secret. If they found the discrepancy, her claim of ignorance would crumble. She needed to review the priory's archives, to find Matilda's records, to trace the unicorn's origins. But time was slipping away, and the bishop's patience was thinner than the priory's walls. As she neared St. Agnes, the gate bell tolled, signaling none. Sister Agnes met her at the entrance, her face etched with worry. "Prioress, thank God you're back." "Sister Beatrice, she's gone." "Gone?" Eleanor's heart lurched. "What do you mean, gone?" Agnes wrung her hands. "I left her cell to fetch water, and when I returned, she was missing. The window was open, the latch broken. I fear she's fled." Eleanor's mind reeled. Beatrice, with her sharp tongue and restless spirit, had defied the bishop yesterday, her outburst inflaming his suspicions. Had she run to escape punishment, or was there more to her flight? Historical tales of runaway nuns flickered in Eleanor's memory, women like Joan of Leeds, who faked their deaths to flee convents. Beatrice was no novice. She knew the risks of apostasy, yet she had vanished. "Search the priory," Eleanor ordered, her voice steady despite the storm within. "Every cell, every corner. And send for Father Thomas. He may know something." As Agnes hurried away, Eleanor entered the cloister, the parchment from Godwin still in her hand. The weight of the day pressed on her, the unicorn's grim reality, Godwin's possible deceit, the bishop's looming judgment, and now Beatrice's disappearance. She thought of her vows, taken 20 years ago in this very priory, when the world seemed simpler. Chastity, poverty, obedience. Yet each felt like a chain now, binding her to choices she could neither escape nor embrace. In her cell, she knelt before the small crucifix on the wall, her eyes tracing its weathered wood. "Lord, guide me," she whispered. "Show me the path through this mire." But the silence offered no answers, only the echo of her own doubts. She rose, tucking Godwin's parchment into her desk, and turned to the archive chest. Somewhere within its mouldering scrolls lay Prioress Matilda's secrets, perhaps the key to the unicorn house, or the noose that would hang them all. As dusk fell, the priory's bell rang for vespers, its mournful toll a reminder of the hours slipping away. Eleanor stepped into the cloister, her resolve hardening. She would find Beatrice, confront Godwin, and face the bishop. The unicorn's shadow stretched long, but she would not let it consume St. Agnes. Not yet. The price of survival. The rain fell in sheets as Sister Eleanor crossed the Thames once more, the boatman's skiff rocking beneath her. Southwark's muddy streets awaited, and with them Master Friarmut, the man who held the lease to the unicorn house. Eleanor's confrontation with Godwin yesterday had left her with more questions than answers. A discrepancy in the rents, a legacy of Prioress Matilda's dealings, and the spectre of the bishop's scrutiny. Now, with Sister Beatrice missing and the priory teetering on the edge of scandal, Eleanor could delay no longer. She needed to face Friarmut, to learn the full extent of the unicorn's operations, and to decide whether St. Agnes could afford to cut ties with its tainted coin. The rain plastered her cloak to her habit, but Eleanor barely noticed. Her mind churned with the memory of Elsa's weary eyes and Joan's bruised cheek, the women who called the unicorn home. Godwin's words echoed, "At least your coin feeds the poor, not just your belly." Was there truth in that, or was it a merchant's excuse for greed? The Priory's larder held barely a week's worth of bread, the roof leaked in every storm, and the nuns shivered through winter without enough wood for the hearth. 10 marks, or 12, if Godwin's tally was true, could change that. But at what cost to her soul? The unicorn house looked even bleaker in the rain, its timber walls streaked with grime, its shutters rattling in the wind. Eleanor knocked, her hand steady despite the dread coiling in her chest. The door opened, and Elle stood there, her apron damp, her face etched with suspicion. "Back so soon, prioress?" she said, stepping aside. "Southwark's getting to be a habit for you." "I seek Master Friarmut," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "Is he within?" Els nodded, jerking her thumb toward the dim interior. "Aye, in the back. Mind your step. He's not one for nuns meddling in his business." The room was much as Eleanor remembered. The scarred table, the single candle, the air thick with tallow and despair. Joan was absent, but Kate, the older woman with the frayed shawl, sat mending a torn kirtle. She glanced up, her eyes wary, then returned to her work. Friarmut lounged by a small fire, his boots still propped on a stool, his dagger gleaming at his belt. He rose as Eleanor entered, his smile sharp as a blade. "Prioress Eleanor," he said, his voice dripping with mock courtesy. "To what do I owe this holy visit?" Eleanor wasted no time. "The unicorn house, Master Friarmut. It belongs to St. Agnes Priory, yet I hear it is a brothel. I would know the truth of its trade and your role in it." Friarmut's smile widened, but his eyes were cold. "Truth? This is a house, prioress, same as any. Folk live here, pay rent, and I pass it on to your steward. 10 marks a year, as agreed by your predecessors. What they do to earn it ain't my concern, nor yours." "It is my concern," Eleanor snapped, her patience fraying. "The priory is vowed to God. If this house profits from sin, I must know." Elle stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Sin's a fine word, prioress, but it don't fill bellies. My girls work to live, same as your nuns pray to live. Without this house, they'd be in the streets, or worse, Winchester stews, where men take more than coin." Eleanor's gaze softened as she looked at Elle's. "And you, Els? You said a nun saved you. Was this house her doing?" Els nodded, her hands twisting her apron. "Sister Mary, God rest her. She set up a place for women like me, fallen ones, to start anew. But when the house burned, we had nowhere else. The priory kept the lease, and Friarmut here took over. It's not what Sister Mary wanted, but it's kept us alive." Friarmut snorted, crossing his arms. "Alive and profitable, prioress. Your priory's been taking the rent since Matilda's day. You cut us off, you cut your own throat. How'll you feed your sisters without our coin?" Eleanor's chest tightened. The ledger's discrepancy, 10 marks in the priory's books, 12 in Godwin's tally, flashed in her mind. "And how much coin exactly?" she asked, her voice low. "My steward's records show 12 marks, yet the priory receives 10. Where do the other 2 go?" Friarmut's smile faltered, his hand straying to his dagger. "You'd best ask Godwin that. I pay what's owed, 12 marks, full and true. If your books say different, someone's skimming the cream." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Godwin's evasions, his unease at the market, now took on a darker shade. Was he pocketing the difference, or was Friar Mutt lying to deflect blame? Either way, the bishop's clerks would find the discrepancy, and it would be Eleanor who answered for it. "I will have the truth," she said, her eyes locked on Friar Mutt's. "If you've cheated the priory, or if this house defiles our name, I'll see it ended." Friar Mutt laughed, a harsh bark that echoed in the small room. "End it? And what then? Your nuns'll starve, and my girls'll be prey to worse men than me. You think you're pure, prioress, but purity don't mend roofs or buy bread. You need us, same as we need you." Els placed a hand on Eleanor's arm, her touch surprisingly gentle. "He's a cur, prioress, but he's not wrong. This house ain't heaven, but it's a roof. Sister Mary understood that. Maybe you can, too." Eleanor pulled away, her mind a storm of doubt. She thought of the priory's crumbling walls, the sisters' thin faces, the bishop's cold gaze. Cutting ties with the unicorn would cleanse St. Agnes's soul but doom its body. Keeping the rent meant complicity in sin, a stain she could not wash away. And now, with Godwin's possible deceit, the web grew tighter. "I will decide what St. Agnes needs," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "But know this, I will not let this house destroy us." She left the unicorn house, the rain soaking her cloak as she hurried to the wharf. The boatman rowed her back in silence, the Thames a churning mirror of her thoughts. Friar Mutt's words haunted her. "You need us, same as we need you." Was that the truth of it, a grim partnership born of necessity? And what of Godwin's betrayal? If he was skimming marks, he had endangered the priory as much as the unicorn itself. Back at St. Agnes, the priory was in disarray. Sister Agnes met her at the gate, her face pale. "Prioress, we've searched everywhere. Beatrice is truly gone. And Father Thomas says a horse is missing from the stable." Eleanor's heart sank. Beatrice, defiant and reckless, had not just fled on foot. She had taken a horse, a bold act that could draw the bishop's wrath. "Send word to the nearby villages," Eleanor said. "Discreetly. If she's found, bring her back quietly. The bishop must not know." Agnes nodded, but her eyes were troubled. "And the bishop's clerks? They're still in the chapter house, poring over the ledger. They've asked for you." Eleanor's stomach knotted. The ledger, with its damning 10 marks, was now a ticking bomb. If the clerks noticed the discrepancy with Godwin's tally, her claims of ignorance would collapse. She needed to find Beatrice, confront Godwin, and search the archives for Matilda's records, all before the bishop's patience ran out. "Tell them I'll come shortly," she said. "I must pray first." In her cell, Eleanor knelt before the crucifix, but no words came. Her vows, chastity, poverty, obedience, felt like chains, each link forged by choices she had not made. Prioress Matilda had faced famine. Eleanor faced scandal. Both had turned to Southwark's coin to survive. Was she any different? The rain drummed on the roof, a relentless reminder of the leaks she could not afford to fix without the unicorn's rent. She rose, her resolve hardening. Tomorrow, Godwin would answer for his accounts. She would search the archives for Matilda's deeds, seeking the truth of the unicorn's origins. And she would find Beatrice, before her flight brought ruin to them all. The priory's survival hung by a thread, and Eleanor would not let it snap. Not yet. Whispers of rebellion. The priory's archive was a crypt of dust and shadow, tucked beneath the chapter house where the air clung heavy with the scent of moldering vellum. Sister Eleanor knelt before a battered oak chest, its iron bands rusted from years of neglect. The bishop's clerks were still in the chapter house above, their quills scratching through the priory's ledger like hounds sniffing out blood. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she sorted through scrolls and parchments, searching for Prioress Matilda's records, the key to the Unicorn House's origins. The rain had stopped, but the damp seeped through the stone walls, chilling her bones as she worked. Beatrice's disappearance, Godwin's deceit, and the bishop's looming judgment pressed on her like a millstone, but she could not falter. Not now. Above, the priory buzzed with unease. Novice Marjorie, barely 16, felt it keenly as she swept the cloister, her broom stirring dust that danced in the weak light of a clouded noon. The other nuns whispered as they passed, their voices low but sharp with fear. "Beatrice is gone," they said, "fled like a thief in the night. The bishop will shut us down. The Unicorn House, can it be true?" Marjorie's hands tightened on the broom, her heart racing. She had defended Prioress Eleanor before the bishop, her voice trembling with loyalty, but now doubt gnawed at her. The Unicorn House, a brothel, they said. How could St. Agnes, her sanctuary, be tangled in such sin? Marjorie had come to the priory 2 years ago, a merchant's daughter whose family could afford neither dowry nor convent fees. Prioress Eleanor had taken her in, waiving the customary gift, teaching her to read the psalms and tally accounts. Marjorie had seen Eleanor as a beacon of strength, a woman who wrestled with the world's harshness and won. But the bishop's accusations, Beatrice's defiance, and the whispers of Southwark stews shook that faith. What if Eleanor had known about the unicorn? What if Marjorie's vows bound her to a lie? She paused by the cloister's well, her reflection wavering in the dark water. At home, her sisters had married or served in noble houses, their futures secured by men's choices. Marjorie had chosen the veil, or so she thought. Was the convent just another cage, its walls built on secrets? She thought of Beatrice, her sharp tongue and restless eyes, now fled into the unknown. Had she escaped to freedom or to ruin? Marjorie! Sister Agnes's voice cut through her thoughts, shrill with urgency. The older nun hurried across the cloister, her habit flapping. "The prioress needs you in the archive. And there's news. A peddler saw a woman on a horse near Lambeth last night, dressed in black. It might be Beatrice." Marjorie's breath caught. Lambeth was a marshy sprawl, a place of taverns and thieves. If Beatrice was there, she was in danger, or dangerous. "I'll go to the prioress," Marjorie said, setting the broom aside. Her heart thudded with a mix of fear and resolve. She wanted to believe in Eleanor, to cling to the woman who had given her a home. But the whispers of rebellion, sparked by Beatrice's flight, stirred something in her own soul. In the archive, Eleanor barely looked up as Marjorie entered, her hands stained with ink and dust. Scrolls littered the floor, their wax seals cracked like old bones. "Help me," Eleanor said, her voice taut. "We're looking for Prioress Matilda's records, anything from 30 years ago, about Southwark or the Unicorn House." Marjorie knelt beside her, her small hands sorting through the parchments. "Prioress," she ventured, her voice hesitant, "is it true? About the Unicorn House?" The bishop said. "The bishop seeks a scandal," Eleanor cut in, her eyes fixed on a faded charter. "The Unicorn is a house we lease, nothing more. But I need to know how it began, and why." She paused, her gaze softening as she met Marjorie's eyes. "You defended me before him, Marjorie. That took courage. But you must trust me now. The truth is not always what it seems." Marjorie nodded, though her doubts lingered. She wanted to ask about Beatrice, about the whispers, about the ledger's damning entry. But Eleanor's face, etched with exhaustion and resolve, silenced her. Together they worked through the chest, unrolling scrolls that crumbled at the edges. Most were mundane, land grants, tithe records, lists of alms. But then Marjorie's fingers brushed a parchment sealed with a cross, its ink faded but legible. "Prioress," she said, holding it up. "This is from Matilda's time." Eleanor took it, her breath catching. The document was a lease, dated 1345, granting the Unicorn House to one William Friarmut, father to the current landlord, for 10 marks yearly. A note in Matilda's spidery hand read, "For the refuge of wayward women, under Sister Mary's care." Eleanor's heart sank. A refuge, not a brothel. Sister Mary's lay sister house, meant to save women like Els, had twisted into something darker. But how? Had Matilda known, or had the change come later? "There's more," Marjorie said, pulling another parchment from the pile. It was a letter, its wax seal broken, addressed to Matilda from a Southwark priest. Eleanor read aloud, her voice low, "The house by the rose has fallen to ill repute, prioress. Sister Mary is dead, and the women there ply a sinful trade. I urge you to reclaim the property, lest Saint Agnes bear the stain." The letter was dated 1350, 5 years after the lease. Eleanor's hands trembled. Matilda had known. She had been warned, yet the rent continued, year after year, through her successors to Eleanor's own time. Had Matilda chosen survival over sanctity, as Eleanor now faced? And what of the 2-mark discrepancy in Godwin's tally? Was it his greed, or had the Unicorn's profits grown, hidden from the Priory's books? "Prioress," Marjorie said, her voice small, "if this is true, what does it mean for us? For our vows?" Eleanor set the parchment down, her eyes meeting Marjorie's. "It means we live in a world that offers women few choices, Marjorie. Marriage, servitude, the convent, or the streets, each is a bargain with sacrifice. Matilda chose to save Saint Agnes, even if it meant a stain. I must decide if I can do the same." Marjorie's eyes glistened, her voice barely a whisper. "And Beatrice? Did she run because of this?" Eleanor hesitated. Beatrice's defiance, her outburst before the bishop, now felt like a warning. Had she known about the unicorn, or was her flight born of her own restlessness? "We'll find her," Eleanor said, her tone firm. "But we must keep this quiet. The bishop's clerks are watching, and one word of this could end us." As they returned the scrolls to the chest, a knock sounded at the archive door. Father Thomas entered, his face pale, his cassock damp from the rain. "Prioress," he said, his voice urgent, "a messenger from Lambeth. They've found a horse, ours, abandoned near a tavern. No sign of Beatrice, but there's talk of a woman in black heading toward London." Eleanor's stomach knotted. Beatrice was moving deeper into danger, and every hour she was gone tightened the bishop's noose around Saint Agnes. "Send men to search London discreetly," she said, "and tell the sisters to say nothing of Beatrice to the bishop's clerks." Thomas nodded, but his eyes lingered on her, heavy with unspoken questions. "Eleanor," he said softly, using her name as he rarely did, "what did you find here? Is it the unicorn?" She met his gaze, her heart aching at the concern in his eyes. "Truths I wish I could unlearn," she said. "But I'll need your help, Thomas, to keep the priory whole. Will you stand with me?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Always." As Thomas left, Eleanor turned to Marjorie. "Go to vespers, child. Pray for Beatrice, and for us all." Marjorie obeyed, her steps heavy with the weight of what she'd learned. Alone, Eleanor clutched Matilda's lease, its words a silent accusation. The unicorn had begun as a refuge, a noble act twisted by time and desperation. She could end the lease, cast out Friarmut, and face the bishop with clean hands, but at what cost? The priory's survival hung on those 10 marks, and without them, her sisters would starve. Yet keeping the rent meant living with sin, a choice that gnawed at her soul. The bell for vespers tolled, its mournful note echoing through the archive. Eleanor rose, the parchment in her hand, and steeled herself for the days ahead. She would confront Godwin, find Beatrice, and face the bishop. The unicorn's shadow loomed, but she would not let it consume St. Agnes, not without a fight. The runaway. The priory of St. Agnes was a fortress of silence at dawn, its stone walls cloaked in mist as Sister Eleanor slipped through the gate, her cloak drawn tight against the chill. The news of Sister Beatrice's flight had spread like wildfire among the nuns, each whisper stoking fear of the bishop's wrath. Eleanor had sent discreet inquiries to Lambeth and London, but the abandoned horse near a Lambeth tavern was their only lead. Beatrice, with her sharp tongue and restless heart, had vanished into a world that offered women like her little mercy. Eleanor's mission today was to find her, to bring her back before the bishop's clerks caught wind of her apostasy. The Unicorn House's shadow loomed large, but Beatrice's absence was a spark that could ignite the priory's ruin. Eleanor had left novice Marjorie in charge of morning prayers, trusting her loyalty to keep the sisters calm. The archive's revelations, Prioress Matilda's lease of the Unicorn House as a refuge, its descent into a brothel, the priest's warning ignored, weighed heavily on her. She clutched a scrap of parchment with the tavern's name, the Black Boar, scribbled by the messenger from Lambeth. If Beatrice was there, or had left a trace, Eleanor would find it. She could not afford to lose another sister, nor the fragile trust that held St. Agnes together. The journey to Lambeth was short but treacherous, the muddy road slick from yesterday's rain. Eleanor hired a cart from a local farmer, his mule plodding through the mire as she scanned the horizon. Lambeth was a sprawl of thatched hovels and alehouses, a halfway point between the priory's sanctity and Southwark's sin. The Black Boar stood at the village's edge, its sign a crude carving of a tusked beast, swinging in the wind. Eleanor paid the farmer and approached, her heart pounding. A nun in such a place was a rare sight, and she braced for stares. Inside, the tavern was dim, its air thick with the stench of ale and unwashed bodies. A few men hunched over tables, their eyes flicking to her habit before returning to their cups. The tavern-keeper, a broad woman with a scarred cheek, wiped her hands on a rag as Eleanor approached. "A nun in my house?" she said, her voice rough but curious. "Lost your way, sister?" "I seek a woman," Eleanor said, keeping her voice low. "Dressed in black, perhaps a nun's habit, seen here last night. She may have been with a horse from St. Agnes Priory." The keeper's eyes narrowed, appraising her. I saw such a one. Came in at dusk, cloak pulled tight, asking for a man named what? Didn't stay long. Left with him, toward London. Looked like she knew where she was going." "What?" Eleanor's stomach tightened. A man's name was a dangerous thread, one that could unravel Beatrice's intentions. "Who is he?" "A local." The keeper shrugged, tossing her rag onto the counter. "A tanner's lad, works in London now. Bit of a rogue, but not cruel. If your nun's with him, she's likely safe, for now. London's a big place, sister. Swallows folk whole." Eleanor pressed a small coin into the keeper's hand, a bribe masked as charity. "If you hear more, send word to St. Agnes." "Discreetly." The keeper nodded, pocketing the coin, and Eleanor stepped back into the grey morning, her mind racing. Beatrice with a man. A lover, perhaps? The thought was a knife. Nuns who broke their vows faced excommunication, or worse, but Beatrice's defiance in the chapter house suggested she cared little for such threats. Had she fled to escape the priory's secrets, or to chase a life beyond its walls? The road to London was too far to pursue alone, and Eleanor's duties called her back to St. Agnes. The bishop's clerks were still dissecting the ledger, and Master Godwin was due with his full accounts today. She returned to the priory by noon, her cloak heavy with mud, her heart heavier still. Sister Agnes met her at the gate, her face pale. "Prioress, the clerks are asking for you again, and Master Godwin's here, in the parlour. He looks nervous." Eleanor nodded, suppressing a surge of dread. "And Beatrice? Any word?" "None," Agnes said, her voice trembling. But Sister Marjorie overheard the novices talking. They say Beatrice spoke of a man, a tanner, before she fled. They think she loved him. Eleanor's breath caught, the tavern-keeper's words echoing. What, a tanner's lad? Beatrice's rebellion was no mere outburst. It was a calculated escape, perhaps fueled by the priory's tarnished name. "Keep the novices quiet," Eleanor said. "No word of this to the bishop's men." In the parlour, Godwin stood by the hearth, his fur-trimmed cloak discarded, his hands fidgeting with a roll of parchment. His usual grin was absent, replaced by a sheen of sweat on his brow. "Prioress," he said, his voice tight, "I've brought the accounts, as you asked. Every mark, every tenant." Eleanor took the parchment, her eyes scanning the neat rows. The Unicorn House was listed, 12 marks yearly, paid by Friarmut. Her gaze flicked to Godwin. "You told me 12 marks, yet the ledger says 10. Explain." Godwin shifted, his eyes darting to the door. Mistake. Prioress. The Unicorn's rent rose 2 years ago, but I forgot to update the ledger. The extra marks went to repairs, roof tiles, grain for the larder." "A mistake." Eleanor's voice was ice. "Or a theft. 2 marks could feed us for weeks, yet I see no new tiles, no full larder. Where is the coin, Godwin?" He flinched, his hands rising. "I swear, Prioress, it's no theft. The money's in the priory's coffers. Check the strong-box. I meant to tell you, but with the bishop's visit—" Eleanor's mind raced. If Godwin spoke true, the strong-box would confirm it. But his unease, his quick excuses, suggested more. Was he skimming, or covering for someone else? "I'll check the strong-box," she said, her tone unyielding. "And you'll stay here until I do. If you've lied, Godwin, the bishop will know." She left him in the parlour, her steps quickening as she headed to the treasury, a small room off the chapter house. The strong-box, iron-bound and locked, held the priory's meagre wealth. Eleanor unlocked it with the key at her belt, her hands trembling as she counted the coins. There were marks enough for recent expenses, but no surplus, no trace of the extra 2 marks from the Unicorn. Godwin was lying, or someone else had taken the coin. As she locked the strong-box, Father Thomas appeared, his face drawn. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, "a messenger from London." A woman in a nun's habit was seen near Cheapside, with a man. "They're hiding, but the watch is looking for her. If the bishop hears—" "He won't," Eleanor cut in, though her heart sank. Cheapside, a bustling market, was a dangerous place for a runaway nun. Beatrice was slipping further from her grasp, and with her the priory's fragile honour. Send word to the watch to detain her quietly. No mention of Saint Agnes. Thomas nodded, but his eyes held a question. "And the ledger?" "The clerks are close to finishing. They've asked about the Unicorn's rent." Eleanor's stomach knotted. The discrepancy, 10 marks in the ledger, 12 in Godwin's tally, was a noose tightening around her. "I'll handle the clerks," she said. "But check the strong-box later, Thomas. Godwin claims the extra marks are there. If they're not—" She didn't finish. Thomas's face darkened, understanding her meaning. If Godwin had stolen, he had betrayed them all. If not, the fault lay deeper, perhaps with Friar Mutt, or even Prioress Matilda's successors. As Thomas left, Eleanor returned to the parlor, where Godwin waited, his face pale. "The strong-box lacks your extra marks," she said, her voice cold. "You'll answer to the bishop tomorrow, Godwin. Pray your accounts hold." He stammered, but she turned away, her mind on Beatrice. A tanner named Watt, a nun in Cheapside, a priory on the brink. The threads were unravelling, and Eleanor could not hold them all. She thought of Matilda's lease, the refuge turned brothel, and her own vows, stretched thin by necessity. The bell for none tolled, calling her to prayer, but Eleanor felt no peace. She would find Beatrice, expose Godwin's lies, and face the bishop's judgment. The unicorn's shadow grew darker, but she would fight to keep St. Agnes in the light. The priest's confession. Father Thomas stood in the sacristy of St. Agnes Priory, his hands trembling as he polished the chalice for Massachusetts. The morning light filtered through the narrow window, casting a pale glow on the worn stone floor, but it did nothing to ease the weight in his chest. For 10 years he had served as the priory's priest, hearing the nuns' confessions, offering the Eucharist, and guarding their secrets. But now, with Sister Beatrice gone, the bishop's clerks dissecting the ledger, and Prioress Eleanor teetering on the edge of scandal, those secrets threatened to unravel him. The Unicorn House, that cursed name, was no longer a whisper but a shout, and Thomas knew more than he had ever dared admit. He set the chalice down, his fingers lingering on its cold silver. Eleanor's face haunted him. Her sharp eyes, her weary resolve, the way she had looked at him yesterday when she asked, "Will you stand with me?" He had said yes, but the word felt like a betrayal. Not of her, but of the truth he had buried for years. He knew of the Unicorn House, had known since Prioress Matilda's time, when he was a young curate assisting the priory's old priest. He had seen the ledgers, heard the whispers of Southwark's rents, and chosen silence to protect the nuns he served. But now, with Eleanor fighting to save St. Agnes, his silence felt like a sin. The sacristy door creaked open, and Eleanor entered, her habit damp from the morning's mist. Her face was drawn, her eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. "Thomas," she said, her voice low, "the clerks are waiting. They've found the unicorn's entry. 10 marks, not 12. Godwin swears the extra marks went to the strong-box, but it's empty. I need your help to face them." Thomas's throat tightened. The discrepancy, 10 marks in the ledger, 12 in Godwin's tally, was a wound he had hoped to avoid. He had checked the strong-box last night, as Eleanor asked, and found no trace of the extra coin. Godwin was either a thief or a liar, but Thomas's own secrets made him no better. "Eleanor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's something you must know about the Unicorn House." Her eyes sharpened, searching his face. "What do you know, Thomas? Speak plainly." He hesitated, the weight of a decade's silence pressing on him. "I knew it was a brothel," he said at last, the words bitter on his tongue. "When I came to St. Agnes, Prioress Matilda was still alive. She told me the Unicorn began as a refuge, a lay sister house under Sister Mary. But after Mary's death, it changed. Matilda kept the rent, said it was the only way to keep the priory afloat during the famine. I didn't question her. I saw the nuns starving, the walls crumbling. I thought silence was mercy." Eleanor's face paled, her hands clenching at her sides. "You knew and said nothing? All these years, Thomas, while I signed those ledgers blind." "I wanted to protect you," he said, his voice breaking. "You, the sisters, this place. If I'd spoken, the bishop would have dissolved St. Agnes years ago. I thought, hoped, it would fade, that the rent would become just another line in the books. Protect me." Eleanor's voice rose, sharp with betrayal. "You let me carry this sin, Thomas. The bishop's clerks are tearing through our accounts, and Beatrice is gone, perhaps because of this. Your silence has endangered us all." Thomas flinched, her words cutting deeper than any penance. He thought of the nights he had prayed for forgiveness, not for himself, but for the nuns he served, women trapped by a world that offered them no true freedom. And Eleanor, with her fierce will and weary heart, had become more than his prioress. He had never spoken it, never dared, but the warmth in his chest when she stood near was a temptation he fought daily. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'll tell the bishop everything. Take the blame. You don't deserve this." Eleanor's eyes softened, though her jaw remained tight. "No, Thomas. You'll say nothing. If the bishop learns you knew, he'll cast you out, or worse. I need you here, with me, to save St. Agnes. But no more secrets. Promise me." He nodded, his heart heavy with relief and shame. "I promise." She turned away, her gaze falling on the chalice. "The clerks await us in the chapter house. We'll face them together. And we must find Beatrice. She's in London, with a tanner named What. If she speaks of the unicorn, we're lost." Thomas followed her to the chapter house, his steps heavy. The clerks sat at a long table, the ledger open before them, their quills poised like daggers. Bishop Walter was absent, but his senior clerk, a gaunt man named Master Clement, fixed Eleanor with a cold stare. "Prioress," he said, "we've found irregularities. The Unicorn House, 10 marks yearly, yet your steward claims 12. Explain." Eleanor stood tall, her voice steady despite the storm within. "A clerical error, Master Clement. Master Godwin assures me the full 12 marks were paid, though only 10 recorded. I am investigating, and will account for every penny." Clement's eyes narrowed. "An error? Or deceit? The Unicorn House is known in Southwark as a stew house. If St. Agnes profits from such, the bishop will not be lenient." Thomas stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "The priory's accounts are complex, Master Clement. Prioress Eleanor has only recently taken stewardship. If there's fault, it lies with past oversights, not her intent." Clement's gaze flicked to Thomas, then back to Eleanor. "Past oversights do not absolve present sins. We will summon Master Godwin tomorrow, and we expect a full report on this. Unicorn House." As the clerks gathered their parchments and left, Eleanor turned to Thomas, her eyes weary but grateful. "Thank you," she said softly. "But we're not safe yet. I need to find Beatrice before she reaches the wrong ears." Thomas nodded, his mind racing. "I'll go to Cheapside myself," he said. "I know the market, the taverns. If she's with this What, I'll find her." Eleanor hesitated, her hand brushing his arm, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through him. "Be careful, Thomas, and bring her back quietly. The bishop must not know." He left the priory at dusk, cloaked in a plain mantle to blend with London's crowds. Cheapside was a chaos of merchants and beggars, its stalls spilling with cloth and spices. Thomas moved from tavern to tavern, asking for a woman in black, a tanner named What. At the third, the Red Lion, a barmaid with a knowing smile nodded. "Saw a woman like that, with a rough sort. They were headed to a lodging-house near St. Paul's. But you'd best hurry. What's no saint, and she looked scared." Thomas's heart sank. Beatrice, scared? Her defiance had seemed unbreakable, but London's underbelly could break anyone. He thanked the barmaid and hurried toward St. Paul's, the cathedral spire looming through the fog. The lodging-house was a sagging timber structure, its door guarded by a burly man who eyed Thomas warily. "Looking for a woman," Thomas said, slipping a coin into the man's hand. "Black cloak, maybe a nun. With a tanner." The guard grunted, stepping aside. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and laughter. Thomas scanned the room, his eyes landing on a corner where a woman sat, her cloak pulled tight. Beatrice. Beside her was a lean man with a tanner's stained hands, his voice loud with drink. Thomas approached, his heart pounding. "Beatrice," he said softly. She started, her eyes wide with fear, then relief. "Father Thomas," she whispered. "How did you—" "No time," he said, glancing at Wat, who was eyeing him with suspicion. "Come with me. The priory needs you." Wat stood, his hand on a knife at his belt. "She's with me now, priest. She's done with your vows." Thomas met his gaze, his voice steady. "She's a sister of Saint Agnes. Harm her, and you'll answer to more than me." Beatrice stood, her hands trembling. I made a mistake, Wat. I can't stay." Before he could protest, she followed Thomas out, her steps quick and unsteady. As they rode back to the priory, Beatrice was silent, her face hidden in her cloak. Thomas wanted to ask why she fled, what she knew of the unicorn, but the weight of his own confession held him back. They reached St. Agnes at midnight, slipping through the gate unseen. Eleanor waited in the cloister, her face pale with relief. "Beatrice," she said, embracing her. "Why?" Beatrice's eyes glistened. "I couldn't stay, prioress. The rumors, the bishop, I thought I could be free. But what? He wasn't what I hoped." Eleanor nodded, her voice gentle but firm. "You're home now, but you must face the bishop. And tell me what you know of the unicorn." As Beatrice nodded, Thomas felt the weight of his promise to Eleanor. No more secrets. Tomorrow they would face Godwin and the bishop's clerks. The unicorn's truth was unraveling, and St. Agnes's fate hung in the balance. The fire of gossip. The chapter house of St. Agnes Priory was a crucible of tension, its stone walls seeming to close in as Sister Eleanor stood before the bishop's clerks. The morning light slanted through the narrow windows, illuminating the ledger on the table, its pages splayed open like an accusation. Master Clement, the senior clerk, sat with his quill poised, his gaunt face unyielding. Beside him, two younger clerks scribbled notes, their eyes darting between Eleanor and Master Godwin, who stood sweating in his fur-trimmed cloak. Sister Beatrice, returned last night by Father Thomas, sat in the corner, her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The air was thick with the weight of secrets, and Eleanor felt the bishop's shadow looming, even in his absence. "Prioress Eleanor," Clement began, his voice sharp as a blade, "you claim the Unicorn House's rent is a clerical error, 10 marks recorded, 12 paid. Yet your steward, Master Godwin, insists the full sum reached the priory. The strong box tells a different tale. Empty, save for meager alms. Explain." Eleanor's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "Master Godwin has managed our Southwark properties for years. I trusted his accounts, as did my predecessors. If there is a discrepancy, I am investigating it. The priory's survival depends on honest stewardship, and I will ensure it." Clement's eyes narrowed, flicking to Godwin. "And you, steward? Where are these missing marks? 2 coins could buy bread for a month, yet the priory starves." Godwin shifted, his hands twisting the edge of his cloak. "I swear, my lord clerk, the 12 marks were paid to the priory. I gave them to the strong-box, as always. If they're gone, it's not my doing. Perhaps a thief or a miscount." "A thief?" Eleanor's voice cut through the room, sharp with disbelief. "The strong-box is locked, and I hold the key." You told me the extra marks went to repairs, roof tiles, grain, yet I see no evidence of either. Speak the truth, Godwin, or the bishop will have it from you. Godwin's face paled, his eyes darting to the door as if seeking escape. I may have misspoken, prioress. The marks were meant for repairs, but trade's been poor. I held them, thinking to buy at a better price. Held them? Clemens Quill paused, his gaze boring into Godwin. You withheld the priory's coin? That is theft, steward, and a grave sin. Eleanor's stomach knotted. Godwin's admission confirmed her worst fears. He had skimmed the rent, pocketing the extra marks for himself. But the full truth of the Unicorn House remained a thorn in her side. The archives records, found with Marjorie, showed Prioress Matilda had leased the house as a refuge, only for it to become a brothel after Sister Mary's death. Had Godwin known, or had he merely exploited the priory's ignorance? Master Godwin, she said, her voice cold, you will return every mark to the strong-box by tomorrow, or face the bishop's court, and you will provide a full account of the Unicorn House's tenants. Clement raised a hand, silencing her. The Unicorn House is the heart of this matter, prioress. We know it to be a stew-house, a den of harlotry. If Saint Agnes profits from such, the bishop will recommend dissolution. What say you? Eleanor's mind raced. The truth, that the Unicorn had begun as a refuge but fallen into sin, might soften the bishop's judgment, but it would not erase the scandal. She thought of Els and Joan, the women who depended on the house, and of her own sisters, who would starve without its rent. The Unicorn House was leased as a refuge for wayward women, she said, choosing her words carefully. I have learned it has strayed from that purpose. I am taking steps to correct this, to ensure Saint Agnes serves God alone. Clement's lips curled, a skeptic smile. Steps? Too late. Prioress. The gossip has reached London. Taverns, markets, even the King's Court. They call Saint Agnes the Brothel Priory. Your runaway nun, he gestured to Beatrice, has only fanned the flames. Beatrice flinched, her eyes meeting Eleanor's, filled with guilt and defiance. Eleanor had questioned her last night, after Thomas brought her back from London. Beatrice had admitted to fleeing with what? A tanner she'd met during almsgiving, drawn by dreams of a life free from vows. But what had proven rough, his promises empty, and Beatrice had returned, shaken but unrepentant. I ran because I couldn't bear it, she had whispered. The whispers, the hypocrisy, the unicorn's coin keeping us alive while we pray for purity. Now, in the chapter house, Beatrice rose, her voice trembling but clear. My lord clerk, I fled in haste, but I returned of my own will. The prioress is no sinner. She fights for us, for Saint Agnes. If there's fault, it's mine for running. Clement's gaze softened slightly, but his voice remained stern. Your return does not erase your apostasy, sister, nor does it absolve the priory. The bishop will decide your fate, and hers. As the clerks gathered their notes and left, Eleanor turned to Beatrice, her heart heavy. Why didn't you tell me about what sooner? If you knew of the unicorn, you could have warned me. Beatrice's eyes glistened. I heard rumors, prioress, from the almsfolk. I didn't know the truth until I saw the ledger months ago. I wanted to be free, to escape the lies. But I was wrong. There's no freedom out there, not for us. Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. Beatrice's words echoed her own fears. Women's choices were few, each a compromise with a harsh world. She thought of Marjorie, her loyal novice, and Agnes, her devout sister, both caught in this web. You'll face penance, she said gently. But you're home now. Help me save Saint Agnes. Beatrice nodded, her defiance softened by shame. Eleanor turned to Godwin, who lingered by the hearth, his face ashen. "Tomorrow, Godwin," she said. "Every mark, every record. Fail me, and you'll answer to more than the bishop." As Godwin slunk out, Eleanor felt Father Thomas's presence behind her. He had stood silently during the questioning, his support a quiet strength. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, "the gossip is spreading. I heard it in London last night. Taverns calling St. Agnes a brothel. We need a plan to deflect this." Eleanor's mind raced. The outline of a pilgrimage formed, a public display of piety to counter the rumors. "We'll organize a pilgrimage to Canterbury," she said. "The sisters will walk in penance, pray at St. Thomas's shrine. It'll show the world St. Agnes is devout, not corrupt." Thomas nodded, his eyes warm with admiration. "A bold move. But the bishop's clerks will still want answers about the unicorn. And Godwin's theft." "I'll handle Godwin," she said, her resolve hardening. "And I'll find a way to end the unicorn's lease without starving us. There must be another way. Charity, patronage, anything." As Thomas left to prepare for Mass, Eleanor lingered in the chapter house, the ledger still open before her. The 10 marks glared up, a reminder of Matilda's choice and her own. She thought of the archives records, the priest's warning ignored, and Elsa's weary voice. "It's a roof." Could she find a new purpose for the unicorn house, a return to Sister Mary's vision of a refuge? Or was it too late, the gossip too loud, the bishop too close? The bell for terce rang, calling the nuns to prayer. Eleanor joined them in the chapel, her voice blending with theirs in the psalms. But her thoughts were on London, where whispers of the Br0thel Priory spread like fire. She would organize the pilgrimage, confront Godwin's lies, and face the bishop's verdict. Beatrice's return was a small victory, but the war for St. Agnes's soul was far from won. The unicorn's shadow clung to her, and Eleanor knew the hardest choices lay ahead. A pilgrimage of penance. The cloister of St. Agnes Priory was a hive of quiet activity as the nuns prepared for the pilgrimage to Canterbury. Sister Eleanor stood by the well, overseeing the sisters as they packed simple provisions, bread, dried apples, and flasks of watered ale, into sacks for the journey. The air was crisp, the first hint of autumn chilling the morning mist, but the weight of the bishop's scrutiny burned hotter than any summer sun. The gossip about the unicorn house had spread beyond London's taverns, seeping into the villages along the Thames, branding St. Agnes as the Br0thel Priory. Eleanor's plan was bold, a public pilgrimage to St. Thomas Becket's shrine, a display of piety to silence the whispers and prove the priory's devotion. But with Master Godwin's theft exposed and Sister Beatrice's return still a fragile thread, Eleanor felt the ground shifting beneath her. The bishop's clerks had left yesterday, their quills silent but their suspicions loud. Master Clement had promised to report the ledger's discrepancy, 10 marks recorded, 12 paid by the unicorn house, to Bishop Walter, who would return in 3 days to deliver his verdict. Godwin, caught in his lie about the missing 2 marks, had slunk back to Southwark, swearing to repay the coin by tomorrow. Eleanor doubted his sincerity, but she had bigger battles to fight. The pilgrimage, if successful, could sway public opinion and perhaps soften the bishop's judgment. If it failed, the whispers would become a roar, and St. Agnes would face dissolution. Sister Agnes approached, her arms laden with folded cloaks for the journey. "Prioress," she said, her voice trembling with her usual anxiety, "the sisters are ready, but they're afraid." The novices whisper of Beatrice's flight, and of Southwark. They fear the pilgrimage will only draw more eyes. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Let them whisper. We'll walk to Canterbury with heads high, praying for St. Thomas's intercession. The world will see our faith, not our faults. Agnes nodded, though her eyes betrayed doubt. "And Beatrice? Will she join us?" The bishop's clerks noted her return, but they'll question her absence. Eleanor glanced across the cloister, where Beatrice knelt in the chapel, her penance a silent vigil ordered after her return. "She'll walk with us," Eleanor said. "Her presence will show repentance. But we must watch her. She's still a spark that could ignite us all." As Agnes hurried off to distribute the cloaks, novice Marjorie approached, her young face etched with worry. "Prioress, I found something in the archive last night. Another record from Prioress Matilda's time. I didn't want to disturb you, but—" Eleanor's heart quickened. The archive had already revealed Matilda's lease of the Unicorn House as a refuge, its fall into a brothel, and the ignored warning from a Southwark priest. "Show me," she said, following Marjorie to the archive beneath the chapter house. The air in the archive was damp, the scent of mouldering vellum sharp as Eleanor and Marjorie knelt beside the oak chest. Marjorie handed her a small, brittle parchment, its edges crumbling. "It's a letter," Marjorie said, "from Matilda to the Bishop of Winchester, dated 1351. Eleanor unrolled it carefully, her eyes scanning the faded script. "My Lord Bishop," it began, "the house by the Rose, leased for charity, has fallen to ill use. I lack the means to reclaim it, for St. Agnes starves. I beg your aid to restore its purpose, or to find new patrons for our survival." The letter ended abruptly, as if Matilda had hesitated to send it. A note in the margin, in another hand, read, "No reply received." Eleanor's breath caught. Matilda had sought help, acknowledging the unicorn's descent into a brothel, but the Bishop of Winchester, himself a profiteer of Southwark stews, had ignored her. Had Matilda continued the lease out of desperation, or had she, like Eleanor, been trapped by necessity? "This changes everything," Eleanor murmured. "If the bishop's court sees this, they'll know Matilda tried to stop it. It might shield us." Marjorie's eyes widened. "But the gossip, prioress, will it matter? They call us sinners in the market, in the churches. Even the novices doubt their vows." Eleanor placed a hand on Marjorie's shoulder, her voice gentle but firm. "Gossip is a fire, Marjorie, but faith is water. This pilgrimage will douse it. And this letter, it's proof St. Agnes sought righteousness, even if it faltered. We'll show it to the bishop." As they returned to the cloister, Father Thomas approached, his cassock dusty from a morning ride. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, "word from London. The watch found no trace of Wat, the tanner, but the gossip grows louder. They say the king's court has heard of St. Agnes's brothel. We need this pilgrimage to work." Eleanor nodded, her resolve hardening. "It will. We leave tomorrow at dawn. Have the sisters ready, and ensure Beatrice is watched. She's penitent, but her heart is still wild." Thomas hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "And Godwin? He's due with the marks today. If he fails—" "He won't," Eleanor said, though doubt gnawed at her. "I'll meet him at the gate this evening. If he's stolen more than he admits, I'll drag him before the bishop myself." The day passed in a blur of preparations. The nuns stitched simple banners bearing St. Agnes's lamb to carry on the pilgrimage. Eleanor met with each sister, calming their fears, though her own heart raced. The pilgrimage was a gamble. A public spectacle could either restore their honor or amplify their shame. She thought of the women at the Unicorn House, Els, Joan, Kate, whose survival depended on the rent she might have to end. Could she find another way, a new patron, as Matilda had hoped? At dusk, Godwin arrived, his face haggard, a small pouch in his hand. "The marks, prioress," he said, handing it over. 10 as owed. I swear I've taken no more." Eleanor counted the coins, her eyes narrowing. 10, not 12. You admitted to withholding 2 marks. Where are they? Godwin's hands trembled. I used them, prioress, to pay a debt in Southwark. I meant to replace them, but trade's been lean. Forgive me. Eleanor's anger flared, but she kept her voice low. Forgive you? You've endangered St. Agnes, Godwin. You'll face the bishop tomorrow, and pray he's more merciful than I am. As Godwin slunk away, Eleanor clutched the pouch, its weight a bitter reminder of the priory's fragility. 10 marks would buy bread, but not absolution. She returned to the chapel, where Beatrice still knelt, her lips moving in silent prayer. Beatrice, Eleanor said, kneeling beside her, tomorrow we walk to Canterbury. You'll join us, and show the world your repentance. But tell me, did you know of the unicorn before you fled? Beatrice's eyes glistened, her voice barely audible. I suspected, prioress. The almsfolk spoke of it, and I saw the ledger once, in your cell. It made me sick, the hypocrisy. I thought what would be my escape, but he was just another lie. Eleanor's heart ached. Beatrice's rebellion mirrored her own doubts, but her return was a spark of hope. You're not alone, she said. We'll face this together. For St. Agnes. As night fell, Eleanor stood in the cloister, the banners fluttering in the breeze. The pilgrimage would begin at dawn, a 3-day journey to Canterbury, where they would pray at St. Thomas's shrine. Matilda's letter, tucked in her sleeve, was a weapon against the bishop's judgment, but the gossip was a wildfire she might not quench. She thought of Thomas, his confession of silence, and Marjorie, her faith wavering. The unicorn's shadow clung to them all, but Eleanor would lead her sisters through it, whatever the cost. The bell for Compline rang, calling the nuns to prayer. Eleanor joined them, her voice steady in the psalms, but her heart prayed for more than forgiveness, for strength to save St. Agnes, to rewrite its story, and to find a path where purity and survival could coexist. The road to Canterbury. The dawn was a pale bruise on the horizon as the nuns of St. Agnes Priory set out on their pilgrimage to Canterbury. Sister Eleanor led the procession, her black habit swaying as she walked, the banner of St. Agnes, a white lamb on a field of green, held aloft by Sister Agnes. Behind her, the sisters walked in pairs, their heads bowed, their voices murmuring psalms. Novice Marjorie clutched her rosary, her young face pale but resolute, while Sister Beatrice, her penance still fresh, kept to the rear, her eyes fixed on the muddy road. Father Thomas rode beside them on a borrowed mule, his cassock dusty, his presence a quiet anchor. The pilgrimage was a gamble, a public act of devotion to drown the whispers of the Br0thel Priory, but Eleanor felt the weight of every stare from the villagers they passed. The road from the Priory to Canterbury stretched some 60 miles, a 3-day journey through villages and fields. Eleanor had planned the route carefully, stopping at churches to pray and offer alms, ensuring the world saw St. Agnes's piety. The gossip about the Unicorn House had spread like plague, fueled by Master Godwin's theft and Beatrice's flight. The bishop's clerks had left with their damning notes, and Bishop Walter would return tomorrow to deliver his verdict. Eleanor clutched Prioress Matilda's letter in her sleeve, its plea to the Bishop of Winchester her only defense against dissolution. If the pilgrimage could sway public opinion, it might soften the bishop's judgment, but the road was fraught with peril. The first village, Deptford, greeted them with curious stares and muttered words. A crowd gathered by the church, their faces a mix of awe and suspicion. "There they go," a woman whispered, her voice carrying on the wind. "The nuns who run a brothel in Southwark." Marjorie flinched, her steps faltering, but Eleanor kept her gaze forward, her voice steady as she led the sisters in the Salve Regina. The villagers' whispers faded under the hymn's solemn cadence, but Eleanor's heart tightened. The gossip had outpaced them, a shadow they could not outrun. At the church, the local priest, a stout man with a wary gaze, welcomed them with a blessing but kept his distance. "Your devotion honors St. Thomas," he said, accepting their alms, a few coins from the priory's dwindling coffers. "But the talk in London, it's not kind to St. Agnes." Eleanor forced a smile, her voice calm. "Gossip is the devil's work, Father. We seek St. Thomas's intercession to guide us in truth. Pray for us." The priest nodded, but his eyes lingered on Beatrice, whose return had not gone unnoticed. Eleanor had ordered her to walk with the others, her presence a symbol of repentance, but Beatrice's silence was heavy with defiance. As they left the church, Eleanor drew her aside, her voice low. "Beatrice, you must show humility. The world watches, and the bishop will hear of it." Beatrice's eyes flashed, though her voice was subdued. "I'm here, prioress, walking your road. But the whispers, they're true, aren't they? The unicorn's coin keeps us alive." Eleanor's throat tightened. Beatrice's words echoed her own doubts, sharpened by Matilda's letter and Godwin's betrayal. "We'll end that coin," she said. "But first we must save St. Agnes. Stay close, and speak no more of it." The procession moved on, the road winding through fields bare from early harvest. The nuns' voices rose in the Ave Maria, their banners fluttering in the breeze. But the villagers' stares followed, and by noon a group of peddlers joined the road, their chatter loud with mockery. "Brothel nuns," one called, his voice slurred with ale. "Praying by day, sinning by night." Marjorie's cheeks flushed, and Sister Agnes clutched her banner tighter, her lips trembling with silent prayers. Father Thomas spurred his mule forward, his face stern. "Hold your tongues," he said, his voice carrying authority. "These are women of God, seeking his grace. Mock them, and you mock the church." The peddlers fell back, but their laughter lingered, a poison in the air. Eleanor's resolve hardened. The pilgrimage was meant to quell such talk, but it seemed to fan it instead. She thought of the Unicorn House, Elsa's weary resilience, Joan's bruised hope, and the 10 marks that had kept St. Agnes afloat. Matilda's letter, begging for aid to restore the house's purpose, was proof of good intent, but would it sway Bishop Walter, whose own diocese profited from Southwark stews? At dusk they reached a small priory in Greenwich, where the nuns were to rest. The prioress, Sister Joan, greeted them warmly, but her eyes betrayed unease. "We've heard of St. Agnes's troubles," she said, offering bread and thin broth. "The talk is fierce. London, Canterbury, even the King's Court. Your pilgrimage is brave, Prioress Eleanor, but dangerous." Eleanor nodded, her hands warming around the bowl. "We walk for St. Thomas's intercession, and for St. Agnes's honor. The rumors are lies, born of envy and error." Joan's gaze softened. "I pray you're right. But take care. The road to Canterbury is long, and eyes are many." As the nuns settled in the guest dormitory, Eleanor drew Beatrice aside, her voice low. "You heard the peddlers, the prioress. The gossip is a wildfire. Did you speak of the unicorn in London? With what?" Beatrice shook her head, her eyes glistening. "No, prioress. I told what nothing of the priory, only that I wanted freedom. He cared little for my vows or my secrets." Eleanor believed her, but the doubt lingered. Beatrice's flight had drawn attention, and her return, however penitent, was a crack in St. Agnes's armor. "Rest now," Eleanor said. "Tomorrow we walk on, and you'll carry the banner. Show them your faith." Alone in her cell, Eleanor unrolled Matilda's letter, its words a faint hope in the candlelight. The Bishop of Winchester's silence had condemned the unicorn to its fate, But Eleanor would not repeat Matilda's surrender. She thought of Godwin, who had promised the missing marks by morning. If he failed, she would expose him to the bishop, risking further scandal but cleansing the priory's name. And the Unicorn House. She could end its lease, redirect its women to a new refuge, perhaps with Sister Joan's aid. But the coin, those precious marks, haunted her. Without them, St. Agnes would crumble. Father Thomas joined her, his face weary from the day's ride. "The sisters held strong today," he said, his voice low. "But the gossip is relentless. I heard it even here, in the Priory's hall." Eleanor nodded, her fingers tracing the letter. "This may save us," she said, showing him the parchment. "Matilda begged for help, and was ignored. If I show it to Bishop Walter, he may see our intent was pure." Thomas's eyes darkened. "He may, but he'll still demand the lease end. And without that rent—" "I know," Eleanor said, her voice heavy. "But I'll find a way. A new patron, a trade, something. St. Agnes will not fall." Thomas's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that sent warmth through her. "You're not alone, Eleanor. I'll stand with you, whatever comes." She met his gaze, her heart aching with the weight of his loyalty, and the forbidden warmth it stirred. "Thank you, Thomas. Tomorrow we walk on. And when Godwin comes, we'll have his truth." As the bell for Compline rang, Eleanor joined the nuns in the chapel, their voices rising in prayer. The road to Canterbury stretched ahead, a path of penance and peril. The gossip burned, but Eleanor would face it, armed with Matilda's letter and her own resolve. The unicorn's shadow clung to St. Agnes, but she would fight to cast it off, to save her sisters and their sacred home. The weight of faith. The second day of the pilgrimage to Canterbury dawned with a biting wind, the sky a sullen grey that mirrored the unease in Sister Eleanor's heart. The nuns of St. Agnes Priory trudged along the muddy road, their banners sagging under the weight of dew. Eleanor led the procession, her steps firm despite the ache in her bones, the lamb of St. Agnes fluttering above her. Sister Beatrice walked near the front, her penance visible in her bowed head, though her eyes still glinted with a restless fire. Novice Marjorie clutched her rosary, her young face strained, while Sister Agnes, usually steadfast, lagged behind, her lips moving in fervent prayer. Father Thomas rode alongside on his mule, his gaze scanning the horizon for trouble. The pilgrimage was meant to quell the gossip branding St. Agnes as the Br0thel Priory, but the whispers followed them like wolves, growing louder with every village. The road wound through Bexley, a market town where the nuns stopped to pray at the church of St. Mary. The townsfolk gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and scorn. "There's the Southwark nuns," a baker muttered, loud enough for Eleanor to hear, "praying to St. Thomas while their coffers fill with harlot's coin." Marjorie's cheeks flushed, and Agnes's prayers faltered, her hands trembling on her banner. Eleanor kept her voice steady, leading the sisters in the Magnificat, but the words felt hollow against the crowd's murmurs. The pilgrimage was a shield, but it was cracking under the weight of truth. At the church, the priest, a wiry man named Father Hugh, offered a blessing but kept his distance, his eyes wary. "Your devotion is commendable, prioress," he said, accepting their small alms. "But the talk of your priory, it's reached Canterbury. They say you profit from sin." Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she forced a calm smile. "Gossip is the devil's tongue, Father. St. Agnes serves God, and this pilgrimage is our proof. Pray for us, that St. Thomas may guide our path." Father Hugh nodded, but his gaze lingered on Beatrice, whose return had fueled the rumors. Eleanor had hoped the pilgrimage would show repentance, but Beatrice's presence seemed to invite more scrutiny. As they left the church, Agnes pulled Eleanor aside, her voice low and trembling. Prioress, I cannot bear it. The whispers, they say we're no better than the women of Southwark. How can we pray when our souls are stained? Eleanor's heart ached. Agnes, devout to a fault, had always been the Priory's anchor, her faith unshakable. But now doubt cracked her resolve. "Agnes," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm, "our vows hold us to God, not to the world's judgment. The Unicorn House was a mistake, one I'm correcting. This pilgrimage will show our truth." Agnes's eyes glistened. "But what if it's not enough? The bishop returns tomorrow, and if he dissolves us—" Her voice broke, and she turned away, clutching her rosary. Eleanor wanted to comfort her, but a shout from the road interrupted. A rider approached, a young man from St. Agnes's village, his face flushed with urgency. "Prioress," he called, dismounting. "A message from Master Godwin. He's fled, gone from Southwark, they say. The marks he promised are missing, and the bishop's clerks are furious." Eleanor's stomach plummeted. Godwin's betrayal was complete. He had taken the 10 marks he swore to return and vanished, leaving the Priory exposed. The ledger's discrepancy, 10 marks recorded, 12 paid by the Unicorn House, would now fall squarely on her shoulders. "Did he leave anything?" she asked, her voice tight. "A note, a reason?" The rider shook his head. "Nothing, Prioress. But there's talk in Southwark. He's been seen with men from the Bishop of Winchester's court. They say he's bargaining for protection." Eleanor's mind raced. Godwin, aligned with Winchester's men, could expose the Unicorn's full history to save himself, twisting the truth to damn St. Agnes. She turned to Thomas, who had dismounted to listen. "We must find him," she said. "If he's in Winchester's pay, he'll betray us to the bishop." Thomas nodded, his face grim. "I'll send word to London, discreetly. But the pilgrimage, can you continue without me?" "We must," Eleanor said. "The world watches, and we cannot falter now." As Thomas rode off, Eleanor gathered the nuns, her voice steady despite the storm within. "Sisters, we walk on. The devil tests us, but St. Thomas will guide us. Pray, and let your faith silence the gossip." The procession moved forward, but the mood was heavier, the nuns' voices faltering in their hymns. At dusk, they reached a small manor outside Dartford, owned by Lady Margaret, a widow and occasional patron of St. Agnes. She welcomed them with warmth, her hall a haven from the road's hostility. Over a simple meal of pottage and bread, Margaret listened as Eleanor shared their purpose, omitting the darkest details of the Unicorn House. "Your pilgrimage is bold," Margaret said, her eyes kind but sharp. "I've heard the talk, cruel words about St. Agnes. But I know your heart, Prioress. If you need aid, my coffers are modest, but open." Eleanor's breath caught. A patron, exactly what Matilda had sought and failed to find. "My lady," she said, choosing her words carefully, "St. Agnes faces trials. Our income, some sources are tainted. I seek to end them, but we need support to survive." Margaret nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I've lands in Kent, small but fertile. I could grant a portion to St. Agnes, enough to replace a tainted rent. But the bishop's verdict, will it allow you to continue?" Eleanor clutched Matilda's letter in her sleeve, its words her shield. "I have proof our intent was pure, my lady. With your aid, we can cleanse our name and serve God anew." As the nuns settled in the manor's guest quarters, Eleanor drew Beatrice aside, her voice low. "You've been silent today, but I need your strength. The gossip wounds us all, but you can help heal it. Speak of your repentance tomorrow at the next church." Beatrice's eyes flickered with defiance, but she nodded. "I'll try, Prioress. But the truth, it burns. The unicorn's coin, Godwin's lies, how do you bear it? Eleanor thought of Matilda's letter, the Bishop of Winchester's silence, the nuns' hungry faces. I bear it for you, for all of us. We're women in a world that offers few paths. This pilgrimage is our fight. Alone in her borrowed cell, Eleanor reread Matilda's letter, its plea a mirror to her own. Lady Margaret's offer was a lifeline, but it depended on the bishop's mercy. Godwin's flight was a betrayal that could doom them, especially if he was in Winchester's pay. She thought of Els and Joan, the women of the Unicorn House, and her vow to end its lease. Could Margaret's land replace those marks, or would the priory still starve? The bell for Compline sounded, and Eleanor joined the nuns in prayer, their voices a fragile thread of hope. The road to Canterbury stretched ahead, one more day to St. Thomas's shrine. The gossip burned, but Lady Margaret's promise and Matilda's letter were sparks of light. Eleanor would face the bishop, find Godwin, and save Street Agnes. The unicorn's shadow loomed, but she would not let it claim her sister's home. At the shrine of St. Thomas. The final day of the pilgrimage to Canterbury broke with a golden dawn, the first clear sky in days, as if St. Thomas Becket himself had parted the clouds for the nuns of St. Agnes Priory. Sister Eleanor led the procession through the city's gates, her black habit dusty from the road, her heart a tumult of hope and dread. The banner of St. Agnes, its white lamb faded but proud, swayed above them, carried by Sister Beatrice, whose penance had steadied her steps if not her spirit. Novice Marjorie walked close to Eleanor, her rosary beads clicking softly, while Sister Agnes, her doubts quieted by prayer, sang the psalms with renewed fervor. Father Thomas rode behind, his mule weary but his eyes alert, scanning the crowds that lined the streets. The pilgrimage had been a grueling test, meant to silence the gossip branding St. Agnes as the Br0thel Priory. But the whispers had followed, and now, at Canterbury Shrine, their fate would be measured. The cathedral loomed ahead, its spires piercing the sky, a beacon of sanctity that drew pilgrims from across Christendom. The nuns' voices rose in the Te Deum, their harmony a fragile shield against the stares of merchants, pilgrims, and townsfolk. "There they are," a woman muttered, her voice sharp with scorn. "The Southwark nuns, praying while their coffers fill with sin." Marjorie's shoulders tensed, but Eleanor kept her gaze forward, her lips moving in prayer. The gossip had reached Canterbury, fueled by Master Godwin's flight and the bishop's clerk's scrutiny. Bishop Walter's verdict awaited them back at St. Agnes, and Eleanor clutched Prioress Matilda's letter in her sleeve, its plea to the Bishop of Winchester her only defense against dissolution. Inside the cathedral, the air was thick with incense and the murmur of prayers. The shrine of St. Thomas Becket gleamed with gold and jewels, a testament to his martyrdom and the Church's power. The nuns knelt before it, their banners lowered, their voices soft in the Ave Maria. Eleanor felt the weight of every eye, pilgrims, priests, even the cathedral's canons, who knew of St. Agnes's scandal. She had planned this moment carefully, a public offering of alms, a prayer for intercession, and a vow of renewal. But the success of the pilgrimage depended on more than piety. It required the world to see St. Agnes as redeemed. The cathedral's prior, a stern man named Father Anselm, approached, his robes rustling. "Prioress Eleanor," he said, his voice low but resonant, "your pilgrimage honors St. Thomas. But the talk of your priory is grave. What would you say to those who doubt your sanctity?" Eleanor rose, her hands clasped, her voice clear. "Father Anselm, St. Agnes is a house of God, vowed to prayer and charity. We have faltered, as all sinners do, but this pilgrimage is our repentance. We seek St. Thomas's grace to guide us, and we vow to cleanse our path of error." Anselm's eyes narrowed, but he nodded, gesturing to the shrine. "Offer your alms, then, and let your deeds speak." Eleanor signalled to Marjorie, who stepped forward with a small pouch, the last of their coins, scraped from the priory's dwindling reserves. As Marjorie placed it at the shrine, Beatrice rose, her voice trembling but firm. "I am Sister Beatrice, returned to St. Agnes after straying," she said, addressing the crowd. "I sinned in my weakness, but Prioress Eleanor has shown me mercy. This house is holy, and I beg St. Thomas's forgiveness." A murmur rippled through the pilgrims, some softening, others skeptical. Eleanor's heart swelled with pride. Beatrice's confession, though painful, was a spark of redemption. But as the nuns resumed their prayers, a voice rang out from the shadows of the nave. "Holy? Nay, a brothel in cloisters." A man, cloaked and hooded, stepped forward, his voice thick with ale. "They profit from Southwark stews, and call it charity." The crowd stirred, whispers turning to gasps. Eleanor's blood froze, recognizing the danger of this moment. A single voice could undo their pilgrimage. Father Thomas dismounted, moving toward the man, but Eleanor raised a hand to stop him. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm within. "Good sir," she said, addressing the heckler, "you speak of rumors, not truth. St. Agnes serves the poor, prays for souls, and seeks God's will. If we have erred, we repent here, before St. Thomas. Judge us by our deeds, not your tongue." The man faltered, his bravado waning under her gaze and the crowd's shifting mood. Anselm intervened, his voice stern. "Silence, or leave this sacred place." The man slunk back, and the nuns resumed their prayers, but Eleanor felt the fragility of their victory. The gossip was a hydra, cut one head, and another grew. As they left the cathedral, a woman approached, her cloak fine but plain, her face kind. "Prioress," she said, "I am Lady Alice, a friend of Lady Margaret. She spoke of your need for patronage. My husband holds lands near Canterbury, modest, but enough to aid a priory in distress. If you survive your bishop's verdict, seek me." Eleanor's breath caught. Another patron, alongside Margaret's offer, could replace the Unicorn House's rent. "My lady," she said, bowing, "your kindness is a gift from God. I will seek you with hope." The journey back to St. Agnes began at noon, the nuns weary but bolstered by their offering at the shrine. Beatrice walked beside Eleanor, her voice low. "I meant what I said, Prioress. I'm sorry, for running, for doubting you. But the unicorn, will you end it?" Eleanor nodded, her resolve firm. "I will. Lady Margaret and Lady Alice offer a path. We'll find a way to survive without that coin." But the weight of Godwin's betrayal lingered. His flight to Southwark, possibly to the Bishop of Winchester's men, was a sword over their heads. Eleanor had sent Thomas to London to find him, but no word had come. The bishop's verdict, due tomorrow, would hinge on Matilda's letter and the pilgrimage's impact. She thought of Els and Joan, the women of the Unicorn House, and her vow to restore its purpose as a refuge. It was a dream, but one she clung to. At dusk, they reached a small convent near Rochester, their final stop before home. The prioress, Sister Clare, welcomed them with warmth, but her eyes held pity. "The pilgrimage is the talk of Kent," she said, serving barley broth. "Some praise your courage, others scorn your shame. Bishop Walter arrives at St. Agnes tomorrow. What will you do?" Eleanor sipped the broth, her mind racing. "I have a letter from Prioress Matilda, proving she sought to end the unicorn's misuse. And new patrons, Lady Margaret, Lady Alice. I'll beg the bishop's mercy and vow to reform." Clare nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Bold, but risky. Walter is stern, and the king's court watches. If Godwin speaks against you—" Eleanor's stomach knotted. Godwin's silence, or betrayal, could tip the scales. She turned to Thomas, who had joined them, his face grim. "Any word from London?" "None," he said. "But I'll ride ahead tonight, search Southwark. If Godwin's with Winchester's men, I'll find him." Eleanor met his gaze, her heart aching with gratitude and fear. "Be careful, Thomas. We need you." As the nuns settled for the night, Eleanor lingered in the chapel, kneeling before a simple crucifix. The pilgrimage had been a triumph of will, but the gossip persisted, and Godwin's flight was a wound unhealed. Matilda's letter, Lady Margaret's land, Lady Alice's promise, they were lifelines, but fragile. She thought of her vows, chastity, poverty, obedience, and the compromises she had made to keep St. Agnes alive. Was she Matilda's echo, or could she forge a new path? The bell for vespers rang, and Eleanor joined the nuns, their voices rising in harmony. Tomorrow they would return to St. Agnes, face Bishop Walter, and learn their fate. The unicorn's shadow loomed, but Eleanor would fight to banish it, to save her sisters and their sacred home. St. Thomas's shrine had been a moment of grace. Now the true test awaited. The bishop's verdict. The gates of St. Agnes Priory creaked open under a leaden sky, welcoming the nuns back from their pilgrimage to Canterbury with a weary groan. Sister Eleanor led the procession, her black habit caked with dust, her heart heavy with the weight of Bishop Walter's impending verdict. The pilgrimage had been a grueling triumph, their prayers at St. Thomas Becket's shrine a public plea for redemption, but the gossip branding St. Agnes as the Brothel Priory had followed them home. Sister Beatrice, her penance visible in her bowed posture, walked beside novice Marjorie, whose young face was etched with exhaustion. Sister Agnes, her doubts subdued by the shrine's grace, clutched her rosary, while the other nuns trailed silently, their banners furled. Father Thomas was absent, still searching Southwark for Master Godwin, whose flight with the Priory's marks threatened to seal their doom. The chapter house was a cold vault of stone as Eleanor faced Bishop Walter, who sat flanked by his clerks, Master Clement among them, their quills poised over parchment. The ledger, with its damning entry, "Unicorn House, 10 marks yearly," lay open before them. Its discrepancy of 2 marks a silent accusation. Eleanor clutched Prioress Matilda's letter in her sleeve, its plea to the Bishop of Winchester her shield against dissolution. The pilgrimage had softened some hearts, but the bishop's face was stern, his crimson robes a stark contrast to the grey walls. The nuns stood behind Eleanor, their presence a fragile bulwark, while Beatrice's return hung like a shadow in the room. "Prioress Eleanor," Bishop Walter began, his voice resonant with authority, "your pilgrimage was noted a bold act of penance, but the charges against St. Agnes are grave. The Unicorn House is a stew-house, its rent tainting your coffers. Your steward, Master Godwin, has fled, and 2 marks are missing. What defense have you?" Eleanor's throat tightened, but she met his gaze, her voice steady. "My Lord Bishop, St. Agnes is a house of God, devoted to prayer and charity. The Unicorn House was leased by Prioress Matilda as a refuge for wayward women, under Sister Mary's care. I have proof she sought to end its misuse." She produced Matilda's letter, handing it to Clement, who scanned it with narrowed eyes. Matilda begged the Bishop of Winchester for aid, but was ignored. "I vow to end the lease, to cleanse our name, and I have secured new patrons to replace the rent." Walter's eyes flicked to the letter, then back to Eleanor. "A noble intent, Prioress, but intent does not erase sin. The gossip has reached the king's court. St. Agnes is a scandal. And your nun, Sister Beatrice, fled, only to return under duress. What of her?" Beatrice stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "My lord, I sinned in running, drawn by false promises. But Prioress Eleanor brought me back, showed me mercy. I repent, and Saint Agnes is my home." The bishop's gaze softened slightly, but his voice remained stern. "Repentance is well, sister, but discipline has failed here. Prioress, your stewardship is questioned, and Godwin's theft is unanswered. I am minded to recommend dissolution, unless you can prove your reform." Eleanor's heart sank, but she pressed on. "My lord, Lady Margaret of Dartford and Lady Alice of Canterbury have offered patronage, lands to replace the unicorn's rent. I will end its lease within the month, and redirect its women to a new refuge, as Matilda intended. Give us time, and Saint Agnes will stand pure." Clement whispered to the bishop, his quill scratching furiously. Walter leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Patrons are a promise, not a certainty, and Godwin's absence is a wound. Where is he?" Before Eleanor could answer, the chapter-house door swung open, and Father Thomas entered, his cassock torn, his face grim. Behind him, 2 men dragged a disheveled Master Godwin, his wrists bound, his face bruised. "My Lord Bishop," Thomas said, his voice steady, "I found Godwin in Southwark, hiding in a tavern with Winchester's men. He tried to sell the priory's secrets for protection." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Godwin's betrayal was deeper than theft. He had sought to profit from St. Agnes's ruin. "What secrets?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Godwin's eyes darted, his voice a whimper. "I told them nothing, prioress, only that the unicorn paid 12 marks, not 10. I thought Winchester would shield me." Walter's face darkened. "You conspired with Winchester's men, who profit from Southwark stews themselves. This is treachery, steward. Speak, or face the king's justice." Godwin crumpled, his words spilling like a broken dam. "The extra marks, I took them, for debts. But the unicorn's lease was old, set by Matilda. I only collected what was owed. Friarmut paid 12, I kept 2, and gave 10 to the priory. I meant no harm." Eleanor's hands clenched, her anger tempered by relief. Godwin's confession confirmed the discrepancy, but spared her the charge of complicity. "My Lord Bishop," she said, seizing the moment, "Godwin's theft is his sin, not St. Agnes's. I was unaware of the 12 marks until recently. With new patronage, we can end the unicorn's lease and survive." Walter's gaze bored into her, weighing her words against the ledger's truth. "Your ignorance is no absolution, prioress. But Matilda's letter and your pilgrimage show intent to reform. I will grant you 1 month to end the unicorn's lease and secure your patron's aid. Fail, and St. Agnes will be dissolved. Sister Beatrice will face penance under my oversight, and Godwin will answer to the king's court." Eleanor bowed, her heart pounding with fragile hope. "Thank you, my lord. St. Agnes will prove its worth." As the bishop and his clerks departed, Eleanor turned to Thomas, her voice low. "You risked much to find Godwin. How did you know where he was?" Thomas's eyes met hers, weary but warm. "A tavern-keeper in Southwark owed me a favor. Godwin was boasting, thinking himself safe. I couldn't let him destroy you." Eleanor's throat tightened, the weight of his loyalty stirring forbidden warmth. "Thank you, Thomas. We're not safe yet, but we have time." She gathered the nuns in the cloister, their faces pale with fear and relief. "Sisters," she said, her voice firm, "the bishop has given us 1 month to end the unicorn's lease and secure new patronage. Lady Margaret and Lady Alice offer hope, but we must work, pray, labor, and trust in God." Beatrice approached, her eyes glistening. "Prioress, I'll do my part. I'll face the bishop's penance and help with the refuge. I believe in you." Marjorie nodded, her young voice steady. "We all do, prioress. We'll save St. Agnes." As the nuns dispersed, Eleanor lingered with Thomas, the letter still in her hand. "I'll write to Lady Margaret and Lady Alice tonight," she said, "and I'll go to Southwark, end Friarmut's lease. But the women there, Els, Joan, what becomes of them?" Thomas's hand brushed hers, a fleeting comfort. "You'll find a way, Eleanor. A new refuge, perhaps with Margaret's land. You're not Matilda. You'll rewrite this story." The bell for vespers rang, calling the nuns to prayer. Eleanor joined them, her voice blending with theirs in the psalms. The bishop's verdict was a reprieve, not a victory. Godwin's confession had spared her immediate ruin, but the unicorn's shadow lingered, and the month ahead would test her resolve. She thought of Matilda's desperation, the Bishop of Winchester's silence, and her own vows, stretched thin by necessity. Lady Margaret and Lady Alice were lifelines, but the Priory's survival depended on her ability to act, swiftly, boldly, and with faith. As night fell, Eleanor sat in her cell, penning letters to her patrons, her candle flickering in the draught. The Unicorn House would end, its women given a chance at redemption, and St. Agnes would rise anew. The gossip might fade, but the scars would remain. She prayed for strength, for her sisters, and for the path ahead, knowing the hardest battles were yet to come. Breaking the chain. The Thames was a restless mirror under the noon sun as Sister Eleanor stepped off the ferry into Southwark's muddy streets, her heart steeled for the task ahead. The bishop's verdict, a 1-month reprieve to end the Unicorn House's lease and secure new patronage, hung like a sword over St. Agnes Priory. The pilgrimage to Canterbury had softened some whispers, but the gossip branding them the Br0thel Priory lingered, and Master Godwin's betrayal had left their coffers bare. Eleanor's mission today was twofold: confront Master Friarmut, the Unicorn's landlord, and terminate the lease that had tainted St. Agnes for decades, and ensure the women there, Els, Joan, and others, had a path forward. Prioress Matilda's letter, proving her attempt to reform the house, was her moral anchor, but the practical cost of survival weighed heavily. Southwark's chaos enveloped her, hawkers shouting, carts creaking, the stench of ale and refuse thick in the air. The Unicorn House stood as grim as ever, its timber walls warped, its sign a faded mockery of purity. Eleanor knocked, her hand steady despite the knot in her chest. Els opened the door, her apron stained, her weary eyes widening at the sight of a nun. "Prioress," she said, stepping aside, "come to save us or damn us?" "Neither," Eleanor said, her voice calm but firm. "I've come to end the lease. St. Agnes can no longer profit from this house." Elsa's face hardened, but she nodded, leading Eleanor inside. The room was dim, the air heavy with tallow and despair. Joan sat by the window, her bruised cheek faded but her eyes still wary, while Kate, the older woman, mended a torn shift. Master Friarmut lounged by the hearth, his dagger glinting at his belt, his smile sharp as ever. "Prioress Eleanor," he said, rising with mock courtesy. "Back to meddle? Your rent's paid, 12 marks, as always." "No more," Eleanor said, her gaze locked on his. "The lease is ended, as of today. St. Agnes will take no further coin from this house." Friarmut's smile vanished, his hand straying to his dagger. "End it? You'll starve without our marks, Prioress. And what of my girls? You cast them out, they'll be in Winchester stews or dead in a ditch." Els stepped forward, her voice low but fierce. "He's right about us, Prioress. This house is grim, but it's a roof. Where do we go if you cut us loose?" Eleanor's heart ached. She thought of Matilda's letter, begging the Bishop of Winchester to restore the Unicorn's purpose as a refuge, and her own vow to do the same. "I'm seeking a new home for you," she said. "Lady Margaret of Dartford has offered land. I plan to build a refuge, as Sister Mary intended, a place for women to start anew, with honest work. Joan's eyes flickered with hope, but Kate snorted, her needle pausing. Pretty words, prioress. But who'll pay for it? Your priory's as poor as we are. Eleanor nodded, acknowledging the truth. I've written to Lady Margaret and Lady Alice of Canterbury, seeking patronage. Their lands can replace the unicorn's rent and fund a refuge. It won't be easy, but I'll not abandon you. Friar Mutt laughed, a harsh bark. Patrons? Dreams don't feed folk, prioress. You end this lease, you doom us all. The Bishop of Winchester won't take kindly to losing his cut either. Eleanor's blood chilled. His cut? What do you mean? Friar Mutt leaned closer, his voice a hiss. You think St. Agnes got all the marks? Winchester's men took a share, same as Godwin. 12 marks paid, 10 to you, 2 split between me and them. You stir this pot, prioress, and you'll burn. Eleanor's hands clenched, her mind reeling. Godwin's theft was only part of a deeper web, one that entangled the Bishop of Winchester himself, whose diocese profited from Southwark stews. Ending the lease could provoke powerful enemies, but she had no choice. The lease is ended, she repeated, producing a parchment from her sleeve, a formal notice, signed and sealed. Take this to your notary, Friar Mutt. St. Agnes is done with you. Els took the parchment, her eyes searching Eleanor's. You mean it, don't you? A refuge, not just words. I do, Eleanor said, her voice soft but resolute. I'll return in a week with news of the land. Stay strong until then. She left the Unicorn House, the weight of her decision settling like stone. The women's faces, hopeful, skeptical, afraid, haunted her as she boarded the ferry back to St. Agnes. The bishop's deadline was a ticking clock, and Winchester's involvement was a new threat. She needed Lady Margaret and Lady Alice's patronage now more than ever. Back at the priory, the cloister was quiet, the nuns at work mending habits and preparing alms. Sister Beatrice approached, her face pale but determined. Prioress, she said, I've been praying for you. Did you end the lease? Eleanor nodded, her voice weary. It's done, but the cost is high. Friar Mutt says Winchester's men took a share of the rent. If they retaliate... Beatrice's eyes widened. Winchester? The same who ignored Matilda's plea. The same, Eleanor said, her jaw tight. But we have allies. I've sent letters to Lady Margaret and Lady Alice. If they grant us land, we can survive without the unicorn. Novice Marjorie joined them, her hands stained with ink. Prioress, a reply came from Lady Margaret while you were gone. She'll meet you in Dartford in 3 days to discuss terms. But Lady Alice, she's hesitant, says the gossip still clings. Eleanor's heart sank. Lady Alice's caution was a blow, but Margaret's willingness was a spark of hope. I'll go to Dartford, she said. Marjorie, draft another letter to Lady Alice, appeal to her faith, her pity for women like those at the Unicorn. Beatrice, help her. Your voice, your repentance, may sway her. Beatrice nodded, her defiance softened by purpose. I'll try, prioress, for you and for them. As the nuns dispersed, Father Thomas found Eleanor in the chapel, his face etched with exhaustion. I've news from Southwark, he said, his voice low. Godwin's in a debtor's prison, caught by Winchester's men. He's confessed everything, the theft, the deal with Friar Mutt, even Winchester's cut. The bishop's clerks know, but they're keeping it quiet. Eleanor's breath caught. Quiet? Why? Thomas's eyes darkened. Winchester's too powerful. Exposing him risks a feud. But it buys you time. Walter won't push dissolution if it means tangling with his brother bishop. Eleanor nodded, her mind racing. The bishop's silence was a reprieve, but a fragile one. "Then we focus on Margaret's land," she said, "and a refuge for Els and Joan. Thomas, will you ride to Dartford with me? Your word carries weight." He smiled, a rare warmth in his weary face. "Always, Eleanor." The bell for nun rang, and Eleanor joined the nuns in prayer, their voices a steady anchor. The unicorn's lease was ended, but its shadow lingered: Winchester's greed, the women's uncertain future, the priory's empty coffers. Lady Margaret's offer was a lifeline, but Lady Alice's hesitation and the bishop's deadline loomed large. Eleanor thought of Matilda, trapped by the same choices, and her own vows, tested by a world that offered women little mercy. She prayed for strength, for her sisters, and for the women of Southwark, vowing to forge a new path where survival and sanctity could coexist. A patron's promise. The road to Dartford was a ribbon of mud under a sky heavy with impending rain, but Sister Eleanor's heart burned with purpose as she rode beside Father Thomas, their borrowed cart creaking under the weight of hope. The bishop's 1-month reprieve to end the Unicorn House's lease and secure new patronage was a ticking clock, now halfway spent. The pilgrimage to Canterbury had quelled some gossip, but whispers of the Br0thel Priory still haunted St. Agnes, and Master Godwin's confession, his theft of 2 marks and complicity with the Bishop of Winchester's men, had left the priory's coffers bare. Today, Eleanor would meet Lady Margaret, whose offer of land could replace the unicorn's tainted rent and fund a new refuge for women like Els and Joan. But the shadow of Winchester's greed loomed, and Lady Alice's hesitation in Canterbury was a fragile thread in Eleanor's plan. Dartford's manor house was modest but sturdy, its stone walls warmed by ivy. Lady Margaret greeted them in the hall, her grey hair neatly braided, her eyes kind but shrewd. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting light on a table laden with bread, cheese, and ale, a simple feast for a prioress and priest. "Prioress Eleanor," Margaret said, her voice steady, "your letter spoke of need and reform. I know the talk of St. Agnes, and I admire your courage. Tell me, what do you seek?" Eleanor clasped her hands, her voice calm despite the stakes. "My lady, St. Agnes has ended its lease with the Unicorn House, a property that strayed from its purpose as a refuge. We need land to replace its rent, enough to feed my sisters and build a new home for the women displaced. Your offer is our hope." Margaret nodded, her gaze flickering to Thomas. "And you, father? You've stood by this priory through scandal. Do you trust this plan?" Thomas's voice was firm, his eyes meeting Eleanor's with quiet strength. "I do, my lady. Prioress Eleanor has fought to cleanse St. Agnes's name. With your aid, she can save both the priory and the women of Southwark." Margaret leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. "My lands in Kent yield barley and wool, enough for a modest income, say 10 marks yearly. I can grant a portion to St. Agnes, on one condition: the refuge you build must train its women in honest work, spinning, brewing, perhaps healing. I'll not fund idleness." Eleanor's heart leapt, though the condition weighed on her. A refuge for women like Els and Joan would require more than land: teachers, tools, time. "I accept," she said, her voice resolute. "We'll train them, my lady. My sisters are skilled in spinning, and we can seek healers from nearby convents. The refuge will honor Sister Mary's vision." Margaret's smile was cautious but warm. "Good. I'll have my steward draw up the grant. Land near Dartford, enough for your needs. But the gossip, prioress, it clings. And I've heard whispers of Winchester's men, angry at losing their share of Southwark's coin. Can you protect this refuge?" Eleanor's stomach knotted. Friarmut's warning, Winchester's men taking a cut of the unicorn's rent, echoed in her mind. "The Bishop of Winchester's complicity is a shadow," she admitted. "But I have proof. Prioress Matilda's letter, begging his aid to reform the unicorn. If he threatens us, I'll show it to Bishop Walter. Let the truth shield us. Thomas's eyes darkened. Winchester's powerful Eleanor. If he retaliates, the refuge and St. Agnes could suffer. Margaret nodded, her gaze sharp. Then move swiftly. My grant will be ready in a week. Write to Lady Alice again. Her support could sway Winchester's hand. And guard that letter well. Eleanor bowed, her heart buoyed by Margaret's promise, but heavy with the threat of Winchester. Thank you, my lady. St. Agnes will not forget your kindness. The journey back to the priory was silent, the cart rattling through the dusk. Thomas's presence was a comfort, but his warning lingered. Winchester's men could sabotage the refuge, or worse, pressure Bishop Walter to dissolve St. Agnes. Eleanor clutched the draft of her letter to Lady Alice, penned with Beatrice's help, appealing to her faith and pity. If Alice joined Margaret, their combined patronage could secure the priory's future. But time was short, and the bishop's deadline loomed. At St. Agnes, the cloister buzzed with quiet tension. Sister Agnes met Eleanor at the gate, her face pale. Prioress, a messenger came from Southwark. Friarmut's gone. Fled, they say, after you ended the lease. The women at the Unicorn are alone, and there's talk of Winchester's men seizing the house. Eleanor's blood chilled. Without Friarmut, Els and Joan were vulnerable, and Winchester's men could claim the property to maintain their own profits. Send word to Els, she said. Tell her to gather the women and wait for me. I'll come tomorrow with a plan. Agnes hesitated, her voice trembling. And the sisters? They're afraid. Prioress. The novices whisper of Winchester's wrath, and even Beatrice doubts we'll survive. Eleanor's heart ached. Agnes's faith, once unshakable, was fraying under the weight of scandal. Gather the sisters after Vespers, she said. I'll speak to them, share Lady Margaret's promise. We'll stand together. In the chapel, Eleanor found Beatrice praying, her penance softening her once defiant eyes. Prioress, she said, rising, I heard about Friarmut. Is it true, Winchester's men? It may be, Eleanor said, her voice low. But Lady Margaret has pledged land, and I'm writing to Lady Alice. We'll build a refuge, Beatrice, for Els and Joan. Will you help me? Beatrice nodded, her voice steady. I will. I've sinned, but I want to make it right, for them, for us. Eleanor squeezed her hand, a spark of hope amid the storm. Then help Marjorie with the novices. Keep their faith strong. After Vespers, Eleanor addressed the nuns in the chapter house, their faces a mix of fear and resolve. Sisters, she said, her voice clear, Lady Margaret has granted us land to replace the Unicorn's rent. We'll build a refuge for Southwark's women, a true home of redemption. The bishop's deadline is near, but we are not alone. Pray, work, and trust in God. Marjorie's eyes shone with pride, but Agnes's voice trembled. And Winchester? If his men come for us. Eleanor held up Matilda's letter. This proves our intent was pure. If Winchester threatens us, I'll show it to Bishop Walter. He'll not risk a feud with his brother bishop. As the nuns dispersed, Thomas lingered, his face weary. I'll ride to Southwark with you tomorrow, he said. If Winchester's men are there, you'll need me. Eleanor met his gaze, her heart warmed by his loyalty but burdened by the risk. Thank you, Thomas. But if it comes to danger, you must stay safe. St. Agnes needs you. He smiled, a quiet strength in his eyes. And I need St. Agnes, and you. The bell for Compline rang, and Eleanor joined the nuns in prayer, their voices a fragile harmony. Lady Margaret's promise was a lifeline, but Winchester's shadow and Lady Alice's hesitation were threats unvanquished. Tomorrow she would face Els and Joan, offer them hope, and confront whatever Winchester's men planned. She thought of Matilda, her desperate plea ignored, and her own vows, stretched by necessity. The bishop's deadline was a crucible, but Eleanor would forge a new path, a priory free of sin, a refuge for the lost, a future for her sisters. Shadows of power. The Southwark air was thick with the stench of the Thames and the clamour of taverns as Sister Eleanor stepped off the ferry, Father Thomas at her side. The bishop's 1-month deadline to end the Unicorn House's lease and secure new patronage was nearly spent, with only 10 days remaining. Lady Margaret's promise of land in Dartford offered hope for a new refuge, but Lady Alice's hesitation lingered like a storm cloud, and the Bishop of Winchester's men posed a new threat. Master Friarmut's flight had left the women of the Unicorn House, Els, Joan, and Kate, vulnerable, and word had come that Winchester's agents were circling, intent on seizing the property to maintain their own profits from Southwark stews. Eleanor's mission today was to protect those women and offer them a path to the refuge she envisioned, but the shadow of Winchester's power loomed large. The Unicorn House stood desolate, its shutters closed, its door barred. Eleanor knocked, her heart pounding as Els opened it, her face gaunt with fear. "Prioress," she said, her voice low, "you're back. But it's bad. Winchester's men came yesterday, demanding we pay rent to them now Friarmut's gone. Said they'll take the house if we don't." Eleanor's blood chilled. "They've no claim," she said, stepping inside. The room was bare, the hearth cold, Joan and Kate huddled by a single candle. "The lease is ended. The property is St. Agnes's. I've come to offer you a new home, a refuge on land in Dartford, where you can learn honest work." Joan's eyes flickered with hope, but Kate's voice was sharp. "A refuge? Like Sister Mary's dream, before it turned to this? Who'll pay for it, prioress? Your priory's as broke as we are." Eleanor met her gaze, her voice steady. "Lady Margaret has pledged land, and I await word from Lady Alice of Canterbury. The refuge will have spinning wheels, brewing vats, work to sustain you. I'll not abandon you to Winchester's men." Els nodded, her hands twisting her apron. "I believe you, prioress. But Winchester's men, they're not kind. They'll burn this place before letting it go." Thomas stepped forward, his voice firm. "They'll answer to the church if they do. Prioress Eleanor has Bishop Walter's ear, and proof of Winchester's greed. Pack what you need. We'll move you to St. Agnes tonight until the refuge is ready." The women hesitated, their eyes darting between Eleanor and Thomas. Joan spoke, her voice soft. "I'll come. I'm tired of this life. If you mean it, prioress, I'll try." Kate sighed, her shoulders sagging. "Aye, me too. But if Winchester's men follow—" "They won't," Eleanor said, though doubt gnawed at her. She handed Els a small pouch of coins, scraped from the priory's alms, to hire a cart. "Gather your things. We leave at dusk, quietly." As the women packed, Thomas drew Eleanor aside, his face grim. "Winchester's men won't let this go easily. I heard in a tavern. They've been skimming Southwark's rents for years, with Friarmut as their middleman. If you expose them, it's a war between bishops." Eleanor clutched Prioress Matilda's letter, its faded plea her only weapon. "If they come for us, I'll show this to Bishop Walter." Winchester ignored Matilda's cry for help. Let him face that shame. The return to St. Agnes was tense, the cart rattling through Southwark's darkening streets, Els, Joan, and Kate hidden under cloaks. At the priory, Sister Agnes met them at the gate, her face pale with shock. "Prioress, you've brought them here? The sisters will talk, and the bishop's deadline." "They'll stay in the guest quarters," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "They're not sinners, Agnes. They're women with nowhere else to go. We'll shelter them until the refuge is built." Agnes's lips trembled, but she nodded, leading the women to a small dormitory. Inside, novice Marjorie rushed to Eleanor, a sealed letter in her hand. "Prioress, from Lady Alice. It came this afternoon." Eleanor broke the seal, her heart pounding. The letter was brief, its script elegant but cautious. "Prioress Eleanor, your plea and Sister Beatrice's repentance move me. I will grant a small parcel near Canterbury, enough for 3 marks yearly, if St. Agnes survives the bishop's verdict. But beware, Winchester's influence is long. Godspeed." Eleanor's breath caught. Lady Alice's pledge, combined with Lady Margaret's, could yield 13 marks, enough to replace the unicorn's rent and fund the refuge. But Alice's warning echoed Thomas's fears. Winchester's power was a threat unvanquished. "Marjorie," she said, "write thanks to Lady Alice. Assure her we'll protect the refuge, and invite her to visit when it's built." Marjorie nodded, her eyes bright with hope. "And the women, prioress?" "The sisters are whispering already." Eleanor turned to Beatrice, who lingered nearby, her face softened by purpose. "Beatrice, help Marjorie settle Els and Joan. Show the sisters they're welcome, not judged. Their work will strengthen us." Beatrice nodded, her voice steady. "I'll do it, prioress. I know what it's like to feel lost." As night fell, Eleanor gathered the nuns in the chapter house, their faces a mix of fear and resolve. "Sisters," she said, "we've ended the unicorn's lease and brought its women here, to shelter until our refuge is built. Lady Margaret and Lady Alice offer land, 13 marks to keep us alive. But Winchester's men may challenge us. Pray for strength, for the bishop's mercy, and for our new path." Sister Agnes's voice trembled. "Winchester's men, prioress? If they come, what then?" Eleanor held up Matilda's letter. "This proves Winchester's complicity. If they threaten us, I'll take it to Bishop Walter. He'll not risk a feud for their greed." The nuns murmured, some nodding, others clutching rosaries. Marjorie stepped forward, her young voice clear. "We trust you, prioress. We'll help build the refuge for St. Agnes and those women." Eleanor's heart swelled, though the weight of Winchester's threat lingered. She turned to Thomas, who stood by the door, his face etched with worry. "Any word from Southwark?" she asked, her voice low. "None," he said, "but I'll watch the roads. If Winchester's men move, we'll know." The bell for Compline rang, and Eleanor joined the nuns in prayer, their voices a fragile harmony against the storm. Lady Margaret and Lady Alice's pledges were a lifeline, but Winchester's shadow loomed, and the bishop's deadline was a mere 10 days away. She thought of Elsa's weary hope, Joan's tentative trust, and Kate's skepticism, women she'd vowed to save. Matilda's failure, ignored by Winchester, was a warning, but Eleanor would not falter. She prayed for courage, for her sisters, and for the refuge, knowing the battle for St. Agnes's soul was far from won. The scales of judgment. The chapter house of St. Agnes Priory was a crucible of hope and fear as Sister Eleanor stood before Bishop Walter, the weight of the past month pressing on her shoulders. The 1-month reprieve to end the Unicorn House's lease and secure new patronage had dwindled to this moment, with the bishop's final verdict poised to save or doom the priory. The pilgrimage to Canterbury, the sheltering of Els, Joan, and Kate, and the pledges of Lady Margaret and Lady Alice had quelled some gossip, but the whispers of the Br0thel priory lingered, and the Bishop of Winchester's shadow loomed larger than ever. Behind Eleanor, the nuns stood in silent unity. Sister Beatrice, her penance forged into resolve, novice Marjorie, her youth tempered by faith, Sister Agnes, her doubts subdued by trust. Father Thomas stood by the door, his presence a quiet strength, while Els and Joan waited in the cloister, their futures tied to this day. Bishop Walter sat at the head of the table, his crimson robe stark against the stone walls, flanked by Master Clement and 2 other clerks, their quills poised over parchment. The ledger, its damning entry of Unicorn House, 10 marks yearly now struck through, lay before them, a relic of the Priory's tainted past. Eleanor clutched Prioress Matilda's letter, its plea to the Bishop of Winchester, her shield against dissolution. The air was heavy with the scent of ink and wax, and the bishop's stern gaze bore into her. "Prioress Eleanor," Walter began, his voice resonant, "you were tasked to end the Unicorn House's lease and prove St. Agnes's reform. The gossip of your priory has reached the king's court, and the Bishop of Winchester himself has sent word, claiming you've disrupted Southwark's order. What have you done to merit mercy?" Eleanor's heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "My Lord Bishop, we have ended the Unicorn House's lease, severing all ties to its sin. The women there, Els, Joan, and Kate, are sheltered here, awaiting a new refuge on land pledged by Lady Margaret of Dartford. Lady Alice of Canterbury has joined her, offering 3 marks yearly. Together, their patronage yields 13 marks, enough to sustain St. Agnes and build a home for fallen women, as Sister Mary once intended." Clement's quill paused, his eyes narrowing. "Patrons are promises, prioress. And Winchester's complaint is grave. He says your actions threaten Southwark's rents, which fund his diocese. What proof have you of your righteousness?" Eleanor produced Matilda's letter, its brittle parchment trembling in her hand. "This, my lord." Prioress Matilda begged the Bishop of Winchester to reform the Unicorn House in 1351, when it fell to ill use. He ignored her, yet his men took a share of its rent, 2 marks yearly, as Master Godwin confessed. St. Agnes sought to do right, but was abandoned by those who profit from sin. A murmur rippled through the clerks, and Walter's face darkened. "You accuse Winchester of complicity? Bold, prioress, and dangerous. Godwin's in a debtor's prison, his word suspect. What else have you?" Eleanor gestured to Beatrice, who stepped forward, her voice clear despite her trembling hands. "My lord, I am Sister Beatrice, once a runaway, now returned. Prioress Eleanor showed me mercy, as she has the women of Southwark. Her heart is pure, and St. Agnes is reformed. I vow to serve the refuge, to prove our faith." Marjorie followed, her young face radiant. "We've labored, my lord, spinning, brewing, praying, to prepare for the refuge. The sisters stand united, and our patron's grants are sealed." Walter leaned back, his fingers steepled, his gaze shifting to Thomas. "Father Thomas, you've served this priory through its trials. Do you vouch for this reform?" Thomas nodded, his voice steady. "I do, my lord. Prioress Eleanor has ended the unicorn stain and secured a path forward. Winchester's men seek to protect their own gain, not God's will." Clement whispered to Walter, his quill scratching furiously. The bishop's eyes flicked to the letter, then to Eleanor. "Your pilgrimage moved many, prioress, and your patron's pledges are noted. But Winchester's influence is long, and his complaint cannot be ignored. I am minded to spare St. Agnes, but on strict terms. The refuge must be built within 6 months, and the priory's accounts will be audited yearly. Fail, and dissolution will follow." Eleanor's breath caught, a fragile victory within reach. But before she could speak, the door burst open, and a man in Winchester's livery strode in, his face flushed with urgency. "My Lord Bishop," he said, bowing, "a message from the Bishop of Winchester. He demands St. Agnes's dissolution, claiming Prioress Eleanor has slandered his name and disrupted Southwark's order. He offers to take the Unicorn House under his own stewardship to restore its purpose." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Winchester's move was a brazen attempt to reclaim the property and silence her. She stepped forward, her voice sharp. "My Lord Bishop, Winchester's offer is a mask for greed. Matilda's letter proves his neglect, and Godwin's confession, corroborated by Father Thomas, reveals his men's profiteering. Let him take the unicorn, and he'll perpetuate its sin, not redeem it. Walter's face tightened, his gaze shifting between the messenger and Eleanor. You tread a dangerous path, prioress. Winchester is my brother bishop, and his word carries weight. But this letter— he lifted Matilda's parchment, its faded script a silent witness. It shows St. Agnes's intent was pure, and Winchester's silence damning. I will not dissolve you yet. The messenger bristled, but Walter raised a hand. Tell your lord I'll audit St. Agnes's refuge myself. If it fails, he may claim the unicorn. If it succeeds, his complaint is void. Go. As the messenger departed, Eleanor bowed, her heart pounding with relief and resolve. Thank you, my lord. St. Agnes will not fail. Walter rose, his clerks gathering their parchments. 6 months, prioress, and Sister Beatrice's penance will continue under my oversight. Prove your reform, or Winchester will have his way. As the bishop left, Eleanor turned to her sisters, their faces a mix of joy and fear. Sisters, she said, her voice steady, we've won a reprieve, but the work begins now. We'll build the refuge, honor our patrons, and silence Winchester's greed. Els and Joan will join us, their hands strengthening ours. Beatrice approached, her eyes glistening. Prioress, I'll labor for the refuge for you. Thank you for believing in us. Marjorie hugged her, her voice bright. We'll spin wool, brew ale, whatever it takes. St. Agnes lives. Els and Joan entered, guided by Agnes, their faces tentative but hopeful. Prioress, Els said, we heard. A refuge. Can we truly start anew? You can, Eleanor said, her voice soft but firm. You'll learn, work, and live free of Southwark's chains. Thomas lingered by her side, his smile weary but warm. You did it, Eleanor. But Winchester won't rest. His men may still stir trouble. Eleanor nodded, her jaw tight. Let them try. Matilda's letter is our shield, and Walter's audit our chance. We'll build the refuge, Thomas, and prove them wrong. The bell for terce rang, and Eleanor joined the nuns in prayer, their voices soaring in the psalms. The bishop's reprieve was a hard-won victory, but Winchester's threat and the 6-month deadline were new battles. She thought of Matilda, her plea ignored, and the women of Southwark, now her charge. Lady Margaret and Lady Alice's patronage was a lifeline, but the refuge's success depended on her sister's unity and her own resolve. She prayed for strength, for Els and Joan, and for St. Agnes, vowing to forge a future where faith and survival intertwined. A new dawn. The autumn sun cast a golden glow over the fields of Dartford, where the new refuge stood, a modest stone building on Lady Margaret's land, its walls still smelling of fresh mortar. Sister Eleanor stood at its threshold, her black habit fluttering in the breeze, her heart a mix of exhaustion and triumph. 6 months had passed since Bishop Walter's verdict, granting St. Agnes Priory a reprieve to end the Unicorn House's lease and prove its reform. The refuge, named St. Mary's in honor of its original founder, housed Els, Joan, Kate, and 5 other women from Southwark, their hands busy with spinning wheels and brewing vats. Lady Margaret's grant of 10 marks yearly, bolstered by Lady Alice's 3 marks, had replaced the unicorn's tainted rent, securing the priory's survival. The gossip branding St. Agnes as the Br0thel priory had faded, though the shadow of the Bishop of Winchester's greed lingered, a quiet threat Eleanor had learned to navigate. The refuge's opening day was a quiet ceremony, attended by Lady Margaret, Lady Alice, and a handful of local clergy. The nuns of St. Agnes stood proudly, their banners bearing the lamb of their patron saint, while Sister Beatrice, her penance complete, led a prayer of thanksgiving. Novice Marjorie, now a full sister, beamed as she handed out bread baked by the refuge's women, a symbol of their new purpose. Sister Agnes, her doubts transformed into quiet resolve, tended the herb garden that would supply the refuge's healing work. Father Thomas stood by Eleanor, his presence a steady anchor, his eyes warm with pride. The past year had tested them all, but St. Agnes had emerged stronger, its soul cleansed of the unicorn's stain. Lady Margaret approached, her grey braid gleaming in the sun. "Prioress Eleanor," she said, her voice warm, "you've done what many thought impossible. This refuge honors God and your sisters. My land is well spent." Eleanor bowed, her throat tight with gratitude. "My lady, your faith in us was our salvation. St. Agnes and St. Mary's owe you a debt we'll repay in prayer and work." Lady Alice, her face softened by the sight of the refuge, nodded. "I doubted you, prioress, fearing Winchester's wrath. But your courage, and Sister Beatrice's letter, swayed me. This is a house of redemption." Eleanor's heart swelled. Beatrice's letter to Alice, penned with raw honesty about her own fall and return, had tipped the scales, securing the final marks needed. "Thank you, my lady," she said. "Your trust and St. Thomas's intercession have carried us." Inside the refuge, Elle spun wool with practiced hands, her face no longer gaunt but bright with purpose. Joan brewed ale, her laughter a stark contrast to the despair Eleanor had seen in Southwark. Kate, once skeptical, now taught the newer women to mend, her gruff voice softened by pride. "Prioress," Elle said, approaching, "this place, it's more than a roof. It's a life we never thought we'd have." Eleanor squeezed her hand, her voice soft. "You've earned it, Els. You all have. St. Mary's is your home, and St. Agnes your family." As the guests departed, Eleanor walked the refuge's garden with Thomas, the scent of lavender mingling with the crisp air. The Bishop of Winchester had not struck openly, cowed by Bishop Walter's audit and the public success of the pilgrimage, but his men still watched Southwark stews, their influence a silent threat. Prioress Matilda's letter, safely stored in the Priory's archive, remained Eleanor's shield, its proof of Winchester's neglect a deterrent against retaliation. Master Godwin, languishing in a debtor's prison, had faded into irrelevance, his betrayal a lesson in trust. "Eleanor," Thomas said, his voice low, "you've rewritten St. Agnes's story. The gossip is gone, the refuge stands, and the Priory thrives. But Winchester, he may yet stir trouble." Eleanor nodded, her gaze on the horizon. "If he does, we're ready. Matilda's letter, Walter's audit, our patron's support, they're our armor. And the sisters are united, stronger than ever." Thomas's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that stirred warmth she dared not name. "You're their strength, Eleanor. I've served many priories, but none with a heart like yours." She met his gaze, her heart aching with gratitude and restraint. "And you, Thomas, have been our rock. Stay with us, whatever comes." He smiled, a promise in his eyes. "Always." Back at St. Agnes, the cloister hummed with life. Marjorie taught the novices to spin, her laughter echoing where fear once reigned. Beatrice, now a leader among the sisters, organized alms for the poor, her penance a bridge to purpose. Agnes tended the Priory's garden, her faith restored, her rosary no longer a shield but a joy. The 13 marks from Margaret and Alice had filled the strongbox, buying grain, wool, and tools, while the refuge's output, cloth and ale, promised more. Bishop Walter's audit, due next month, would find a Priory transformed, its accounts clean, its mission clear. In her cell, Eleanor knelt before a small crucifix, her candle flickering in the evening draught. She thought of Matilda, whose desperate lease had begun this saga, and her own choices, ending the unicorn's rent, sheltering its women, defying Winchester's greed. The pilgrimage to Canterbury, Beatrice's return, Godwin's fall, all had forged a path where faith and survival intertwined. The gossip had died, replaced by tales of St. Agnes's courage and St. Mary's redemption. But Eleanor knew the world was not kind to women, whether nuns or outcasts. Winchester's silence was not surrender, and the refuge's work was just beginning. Els, Joan, and Kate had found a home, but others still languished in Southwark's shadows. Eleanor vowed to expand St. Mary's, to offer more women a chance at redemption, even as she guarded St. Agnes against future threats. Her vows, chastity, poverty, obedience, had been tested, but they held, tempered by compassion and resolve. The bell for Compline rang, and Eleanor joined the nuns in the chapel, their voices soaring in the psalms. Beatrice stood beside her, her face serene, while Marjorie's clear soprano carried hope. Agnes's prayers, once trembling, now rang with certainty. The priory was no longer the Br0thel priory, but a beacon of reform, its lamb banner a symbol of grace. Eleanor closed her eyes, her heart full. St. Agnes had survived, and St. Mary's thrived. The unicorn's shadow was gone, replaced by a dawn of purpose and peace. As the nuns filed out, Eleanor lingered, her gaze on the crucifix. "Thank you," she whispered, to God, to St. Thomas, to the women who had trusted her. The road had been long, but St. Agnes stood, its soul renewed, its future hers to shape. The light of St. Mary's. The spring of 1357 bathed St. Agnes Priory in a gentle warmth, the cloister blooming with lavender and rosemary, their scents mingling with the hum of spinning wheels and the laughter of novices. Sister Eleanor, now in her 3rd year as prioress, stood by the gate, her black habit worn but her spirit unbowed. A year had passed since Bishop Walter's audit confirmed St. Agnes's reform, sparing it from dissolution and cementing St. Mary's Refuge as a beacon of redemption. The Br0thel priory gossip had faded, replaced by tales of the priory's charity and the refuge's success. Lady Margaret's 10 marks and Lady Alice's 3 sustained the priory, while the refuge's cloth and ale brought modest profit, enough to feed the sisters and the women they sheltered. Yet Eleanor knew peace was fragile, the Bishop of Winchester's shadow a quiet threat that never fully vanished. St. Mary's Refuge, a mile from Dartford on Lady Margaret's land, thrived under Sister Beatrice's care. Beatrice, her penance long complete, had found her calling leading the refuge, teaching its women, Els, Joan, Kate, and a dozen others, to spin, brew, and heal. Els now wove fine linen, her hands steady, her smile a testament to a life reclaimed. Joan, her bruises long faded, brewed ale that sold in Dartford's market, her laughter a daily hymn. Kate, once gruff, trained new arrivals in mending, her sharp tongue softened by purpose. The refuge housed 20 women now, its walls ringing with work and prayer, a living echo of Sister Mary's vision from decades past. Eleanor walked the path to St. Mary's, her heart full as she surveyed the fields where the women grew herbs and barley. Lady Margaret visited monthly, her steward ensuring the land's yield reached the priory, while Lady Alice had sent a healer from Canterbury to train the women in simples and salves. The refuge's output, combined with the patron's grants, had rebuilt St. Agnes's crumbling walls and filled its larder. The priory's archive, once a vault of secrets, now held records of charity, alms given, lives changed, a legacy Eleanor guarded with pride. In the refuge's small chapel, Beatrice greeted her, her face radiant. "Prioress," she said, "we've sent a cart of cloth to London today. The merchants pay well, and Els is teaching 2 new girls to weave. St. Mary's grows." Eleanor squeezed her hand, her voice warm. "You've done wonders, Beatrice. Your heart led us here, from your own darkness to this light." Beatrice's eyes glistened, her once defiant spirit now a quiet strength. "I learned from you, prioress. Your faith, even when I doubted, it saved us all. Back at St. Agnes, Sister Marjorie, now a full sister, oversaw the novices, her youthful zeal tempered by wisdom. She taught them to read and write, ensuring the priory's archive would endure. Sister Agnes, her faith fully restored, tended the cloister garden, her rosary a companion rather than a shield. The nuns worked in harmony, their days filled with prayer, spinning, and almsgiving, their unity a bulwark against the past. The strongbox, once empty, held enough to weather lean seasons, and Bishop Walter's yearly audits found no fault, his stern approval a hard-won victory. Father Thomas remained the priory's priest, his loyalty unwavering. He joined Eleanor in the cloister, his cassock patched but his smile warm. "The village speaks of St. Agnes with pride now," he said, his voice low. "They call St. Mary's the nun's miracle. You've changed their story, Eleanor." Eleanor's heart stirred, the warmth of his words tempered by restraint. "We've changed it together, Thomas. But Winchester, what news of his men?" Thomas's face darkened. "They've kept their distance since Walter's audit, but they still collect rents from Southwark's other stews. I heard in London. They're wary of your letter, Matilda's proof of their neglect. It keeps them at bay for now." Eleanor nodded, her fingers brushing the copy of Matilda's letter, now safely locked in the archive. The Bishop of Winchester had not struck openly, cowed by Walter's authority and the public success of St. Mary's, but his influence lingered. A year ago, one of his men had tried to intimidate Els, demanding she return to Southwark, but Beatrice's fierce defiance and a letter to Walter had silenced him. The refuge was a challenge to Winchester's greed, and Eleanor knew vigilance was their shield. In the chapter house, Eleanor gathered the nuns for a rare meeting, joined by Els and Joan from the refuge. "Sisters," she said, her voice clear, "St. Agnes stands strong, and St. Mary's thrives. But our work is not done. More women seek refuge, and Winchester's shadow lingers. We must expand St. Mary's, seek new patrons, and pray for strength." Marjorie raised her hand, her voice eager. "Prioress, a merchant in Dartford, offered to buy our ale yearly. It could fund another dormitory." Els nodded, her voice steady. "And we've women in Southwark, still trapped. If you'll take them, Prioress, we'll teach them." Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling. "We will, Els. St. Mary's will grow, as St. Agnes has." As the meeting ended, Agnes approached, her eyes soft. "Prioress, I doubted you once, feared we'd fall. But you've made us a family again." Eleanor embraced her, her throat tight. "You were my strength, Agnes, all of you. We've forged a new path together." That evening, Eleanor walked to the Priory's chapel, where a new window gleamed, funded by Lady Alice, a lamb and a dove, symbols of St. Agnes and St. Mary's. She knelt before the crucifix, her candle casting shadows on the stone. The past year had been a crucible, the pilgrimage to Canterbury, Beatrice's redemption, Godwin's betrayal, Winchester's threat. Prioress Matilda's choices, born of desperation, had nearly doomed them, but Eleanor's had saved them. The Unicorn House was gone, its women reborn, the Priory's name cleansed. Yet she knew the world was harsh. Women, whether nuns or outcasts, faced endless trials. St. Mary's was a beginning, not an end, and Eleanor vowed to protect it, to seek more women from Southwark's shadows, to challenge Winchester's greed with quiet defiance. She thought of Thomas, his loyalty a forbidden warmth she held at bay, and her sisters, their faith her foundation. Her vows, chastity, poverty, obedience, had been tested, but they held, tempered by compassion and courage. The gossip was gone, replaced by tales of redemption, but Eleanor knew new challenges would come. She prayed for strength, for Beatrice, Marjorie, Agnes, Els, Joan, and the women yet to come. St. Agnes was no longer a scandal but a sanctuary, its light joined to St. Mary's, a beacon for the lost. The bell for Compline rang, and Eleanor joined the nuns, their voices soaring in the psalms. Beatrice stood beside her, Marjorie's soprano clear, Agnes's prayers steady. The chapel glowed, the lamb and dove shining in the candlelight. St. Agnes had risen from its shadows, and St. Mary's carried its hope forward. Eleanor closed her eyes, her heart full. The story was hers to write now, and she would write it with faith, for her sisters, for the women of Southwark, for a future where redemption was more than a dream.